You're listening to another episode of Battles with Bits of Rubber, the podcast about making prosthetics.
I'm still not 100% on printed resin cores being usable to make deadened silicon. I'm still having some issues with deadened silicon because once you add deadener to silicon, it becomes more sensitive. And
well, are you using cap plastic?
yep, but I'm not confident that it will definitely work every time in the way that I know for a fact that my epoxy cores definitely were not in it. So what I've been doing is I printed faces and remolded them to make epoxy cores. So I did like a epoxy coat surface and then backed it up with freeform air, and then I did a couple of layers of epoxy and glass on the back of that. So it's a nice thin, lightweight, strong, rigid core that definitely doesn't have a problem with silicon. And then I sculpted that in plastiline, sculpted what I wanted it in plastiline, and then I scanned that finished sculpt on the core, and then did my cutting edge and overflow in ZBrush, and then made the jackets for it. Did like a thickness of clay over the sculpt digitally.
Is that what I saw you posted on Instagram?
Yeah, that's right. And then printed the jacket in 6 pieces because I could probably get it in 3 if I just about squeezed it on the bed, but I didn't want it to be a struggle to open the mold. And also because it's a silicone insert, you've got to basically have like a central piece that retains the shape, and then the sides of the silicone can be pulled apart to slot the core in, and then they can snap back, and then the 2 sides go back on without disturbing the silicone. So there can't be any core and any keys.
Yeah.
On that on the 2 sides. So I've done that all digitally, and it was great because whilst I was detailing it by hand, my jackets were printing, and it was really, really cool. So
did you do that on the bamboo?
I did do it on the bamboo. Yeah, I got 2 bamboos working away, and it took me 2 days to print the 12 piece.
Well, I'm going to need a crash course in Z Modeler because we're probably going to need that for some of our miniature work.
Yeah, it's very useful for a lot of things, and it's not the same as CAD, which is my go-to for sort of hard surface stuff.
Yeah.
But sometimes you need specific geometry that follows your sculpt and your core, and it's a really weird mix, this, because I've got a printed core based on a scan cleaned up digitally, and then I'm sculpting in plastiline, and then I scan that, and then today this was a real wank, but I just did it anyway. I wanted to have where the silicon goes in is on the chin because that's the thickest part of the sculpt. So what I did was I drilled the hole where that was going to go, and then I scanned the inside of the core so I could make a custom housing to hold the pore tube.
Okay.
Such a wank. And I posted the pictures of that on Instagram.
Well,
but it worked really well.
Why'd you do that? Because you could.
Because I could, and I've got my workflow down, my system down, where I just pull the scanner out, I scan the inside of the core, I quickly open it up in ZBrush, and then the section I need is only like 2 inches across, but it's just as quick to scan the whole thing, and then just made a little extract, and with the tubing, I measured the tubing I'm going to use, and then made a socket that's 1/2 mil bigger than that. And then, it works. And it's like, I could have just done it normally with a lot of hot glue or something, or I could have plotted it in with some body filler. But I just thought, well, it'll take me like 20 minutes to do this. And then while they're printing, I'm doing something else. And then when they came off the printer, I just popped them in the hot glue, and they fit perfectly. It's quite remarkable. I mean, it's just very
nice.
Kick out of it. And I probably don't need to do that, and I might not do it again, but I just thought, I gotta try this. And then it holds my funnel at exactly the right angle. Just a little thing.
That's nice.
But for all of this talk of mold making and stuff, and I'll put some pictures of that.
Yeah, I'm getting ready to another project. It's one of my own projects, but it's something I've needed for a while. Is because my Shrek mold which is, the cowl and ears,
Mhm.
that the face piece then gets stuck on. God, I've run. I've lost count of how many of those cowls I've run in this mold,
Mhm.
going all the way back to, I think, 2014,
Good Lord.
14 or 15. So I've sculpted a new cowl,
Okay.
and now I need to mold that. And I sculpted. I may have posted. I think I posted a picture. I sculpted it on a core of Jim Eusterman, um, who was a I met him through Frank Ippolito years ago, and he was a model for me when I did a tattoo transfer demo at IMATS a while back. But I've had this core that I've never used. Got it from Frank, and I've had it. Fuck, I'm going to do this new core Eusterman's head, and
Okay.
it's great because he's a big guy. But now I've got it so that it can be used as a standalone cowl and not rely on having to have a Shrek face piece stuck
Oh,
to
smart
it.
move. Right, right. So more of a taper, so it's more
Yeah,
gradual.
so it'll come further down on the forehead, um, and have the ears. I'm going to do it without the ears so that they can put the ears on, so you could use it as a fat cowl for some other kind of creature or character
Smart move. Oh, that's cool.
as well.
What
So
did
I
you
got
make
to
that
mold
mold?
that now.
What did you make your original mold out of that was lasting so well?
There's epoxy.
See, epoxy's the way, isn't it? It's really
Yeah, I mean, it's still a good mold, but it's got some miles on it.
yeah. Well, it's fair play. That's pretty
Yeah,
impressive.
yeah. So I've probably run, maybe at least 60 cowls out of it.
That's a lot of baking, isn't it?
Yeah.
Think about that over the years. That's
Well, fortunately, I don't bake it. I think the instructions on all of the foam kits still say 185 degrees Fahrenheit for 4 hours, and that's gives you such a small margin of error for over baking. So I bake at 135, 140 tops.
oh wow.
So
Okay.
that it's a longer bake time, but it gives you a much bigger window
Yeah.
for getting it out, and going at a lower temperature gives you softer foam.
Yeah.
And I think that's helped give some longevity to the mold.
I bet it has. That's a sensible thing to do because, like you say, the higher the temperature, the more taxing it's going to be on the material, and the fact you've run it 60 times and it still works is great. But that's amazing. And
Yeah.
I guess if you had to make multiples, you could figure out ways of duplicating your mold. But each mold you make, and this is a good example of why a mold should be made very, very well, because you make the mold one time, but you may use that mold many, many times.
Yep.
And silicon is much easier on the molds than foam because of the
Oh
baking.
yeah, I've been running stuff in it for 10 years.
Mm. That's impressive. I mean, that's epoxy for you. I love epoxy for that. Oh, that's really cool. I'm really pleased to hear that.
Yeah, it's one of my success stories.
Excellent. Well, I mean, all this talk of molding, it's only right that we should mention our guest in this episode, which has been a while since we did another episode. We recorded it in November last year.
Yeah,
2024.
yeah. I mean, we did so many really great episodes when I was over for the prosthetics event, and dang, now we can just. And I still have to finish doing the post on the one I did with Nelson Burke when we were driving from Denver to Atlanta
Yes, all of these
couple
things
of
are
years
backed
ago.
up.
Yeah, but we did some great ones in November.
Yeah, we did. It was very, very good. The first of which was with Brian Best, who, for those of you who don't know, is someone I've known, Christ, nearly 30 years. Uh, and we started working, I think it was the Avengers, but it wasn't anything to do with Marvel. This was Avengers as in the reboot of the Avengers,
Oh, the
with the
Emma
whole
Peel and
Emma Peel, and yeah, it was Ralph Fiennes and Uma Thurman, and there were these bees in this movie, these remote control bees that Eddie Izzard controlled with a remote, and yeah, so we had to make loads of these bees, and we were fiberglassing all night, knocking these things out and sanding them and all that kind of business. And I think that's where I met him. That's where I first met him, and we got on really well, and we just kind of stuck around, and we keep bumping into each other at mold rooms, and he had me in on Batman Begins because he was heading up the mold shop for that. And just over the years, he's gotten more and more senior with mold making. Although he's capable of so much more, he just gets, relied upon in mold rooms.
I have got some behind the scenes photographs from Batman Begins. I won't tell you where I got them, but I have got a lot of pictures, mold stuff and
Really?
miniatures and everything. I got a ton of pictures from Batman Begins. Maybe I can go through those, and I'll send you a link to it so you can look
Oh, right.
through
But
them.
it's the first one that Christian Bale did. Is that the
Yeah,
right one?
yeah,
I may have got
with
the name.
Liam Neeson. That's
Uh,
when the subway crashes down into the sub basement parking lot, and
it was around 2001.
yeah, yeah.
No, no, no. Sorry, 2005, I think.
Anyway, I have got a ton of behind the scenes pictures from
Okay.
that. So I'll send you
Well,
a
it
link
was
so you can look through if there's anything we want to include on the show
excellent.
notes.
Okay. Yeah, well, look at that. Now, in the last few years, Brian's been, I think he sort of kicked off really hard during the lockdowns and COVID, but he basically taught himself ZBrush and really got stuck into mold making digitally.
No, he's good at everything he tries.
Yeah, well, he's always been good like that. And we've got some pictures that we were there that we'll put on this post of notes that he drew up on, oh, crikey, I'm thinking the first Mummy movie, not the Tom Cruise one, the good one with Brendan.
Yeah, with Brendan Fraser.
Around 99, 2000, and we worked on that was with Nick Dubban just before Harry Potter, the first Harry Potter. And he always used to keep notes of his mixes, his fiberglass mixes, and he would draw a picture and make a note whether we always use the same bowls, these splash bowls for fiberglassing, and it's a decent amount of resin to mix up. It's about sort of 14 inches across this bowl, about 6, 7 inches deep, and black flexible plasterers bowls. And we've always used those. They're always the same size. And then he would say, how much of it, a quarter, half, three-quarter bowl, the temperature, the humidity, how much catalyst he used, how long it took to go off. And he would keep a list of all these things. And so if he had to do a half body, he would make a note of how much resin, and he would go through his notes and he would know, oh, a body uses this much resin, or it went off this much. And
Yeah, it's
the,
like a foam latex
yeah, like a
log sheet.
book. And it's really handy because you just get a sense.
Brilliant.
I mean, as a user, because you just do it a lot, but as somebody that,
But he's got drawings along with it, not just notations of formulas. He's got diagrams of how pieces fit together, and
yeah,
Claire Green used to do that same kind of thing. But
yes, very, very meticulous.
I think it's a wonderful habit to get into if you're just starting out.
It is. And it's
Keep
the kind
track
of
of,
thing.
document everything.
Yeah, it's good because it's the kind of thing that also demonstrates how pragmatic somebody is about their work, because you record all this stuff and then whatever happens, you document that too. And then you go back over what you did, so you figure out how it went wrong rather than being crushed by it. It's kind of like, well, there's a job that needs to be done. Let's keep a record of this so we know how not to do this again, or whatever.
Absolutely. No, it's I think it's a great way to keep track of your work.
It is. And on the Mummy movie and on a load of movies worked together, we did a movie called Mindhunters, which I think was a Rennie Harlin movie with Christian Slater and stuff. It was like this weird FBI conspiracy thing, and there were a bunch of effects in that we had to do. That was for David White. This was, Christ, 25 years ago. And he had lists of, we had a body that had to float in a tank, I think. And he documented how the skin was going to come apart off the body, where we were going to cut the silicon to get it off the core, and how we're going to stick it back together, and where the the buoyancy was going to be in the body so that it floated the right way and all this kind of stuff. And it's like really, really well documented. And he would do these very elaborate, at the time he used Photoshop, and he would do, nowadays, I think you just use like InDesign, but he was using Photoshop to draw these whole pages. And they weren't for anybody. It was just to keep a record of things. And he still has them. And he got them out when we were there and we went through
Yeah, they're
photos.
amazing.
Yeah. And it was amazing.
They're jaw dropping.
Really, really good stuff.
Yeah.
But it's a testament to why he's as good as he is, because he's always been very focused on the job and making sure that he documents it. It's not enough just to be able to do it.
And yeah, he's meticulous.
Again, yeah, he wants to be able to do it again, and then he can show somebody else why something does or doesn't work. And it's brilliant. So this was a really good chat. We went to his house and his workshop there, which
Up on the hill.
up on the hill. And he's a freelancer like me, you know, he spends most of his time working for other people, but he has a setup at home. And he had this really cool setup, and he's got his printers there and everything, and
Which he built himself.
typical Brian.
Yeah. It's the structure. He built the entire thing from the ground up.
Well, you know, this is one
It's not like just remodeling a garage attached to your house. He fucking cut the wood, built the frame, put it together.
well, this is, I mean, we always used to do when we went into a space, because a lot of the workshops that we have, then we'd just move into a space that wasn't in any way fit for what it needed to be done. And so we would spend a lot of time building the interior of the workspace. So we would not necessarily install extraction, but we might put in additional bays and reroute the pipe work. I remember setting up sinks and putting in plaster traps, and we would build shelving and stands for things, all this kind of stuff. We do it ourselves. And
Brian did not do that with this. This is more for
it's
for his digital setup.
Yeah, but the fact that we used to do that stuff all the time means he's not, although he's doing this digital stuff, and this is really important, he knows from the ground up how this stuff is made. And so when it comes to building a workshop or thinking about how you're going to design your mold, he's used to doing things the long way and building them with his hands. So he understands the practicalities of things, just things as simple as, if you're going to get, you know, a 50-gallon drum of resin, where's it going to go? How do you open it safely without making a mess? How do you make sure you don't make a mess every time you decant your pigments? And he would build a rack and get the syringes for the pigments and all this kind of stuff from the ground up, so that the day-to-day work is as efficient as possible without the task. And a lot of people wouldn't bother doing that. They just have a drum that they tip every time they needed to, and then it would run down the side, then it would run around the rim, then it would ruin the floor, and this kind of cascading
And you're wasting a lot of material at the same time.
Yeah, and he was like, fuck that, I want this to be done right. But we know what the problems are. I've got a fucking notebook full of all of them. You know, let's make sure we hit those things early. And we'd spend a week, you know, doing these things. And he's always done that. And it's like, it makes sense. And that when you get to a situation now where you're doing things digitally, he'll be thinking about all these things that you would need a mold to do. And the fact that he's doing it in ZBrush is kind of irrelevant, because the ZBrush is just as a tool to produce the finished thing, but you still need to think like a mold maker about how these molded parts are going to go together, and how do they locate, and what kind of keys would you use, and how are you going to close the mold? Is it bolts? Is it clamps? Is it straps? All this kind of stuff. And it's that physical hands-on background which feeds into this stuff so much. It's so
well, he was doing some like figurines of his was it his daughter?
Yeah, his son and daughter.
Son and daughter, and they went through, I don't know how many iterations of each of these for the paint scheme and how the pieces fit together. It is really impressive.
And that, I believe, he used a Revo Point Miraco scanner, which is a pretty basic scanner. It's not a high end. It's not like an Artex Spider. And I think he wanted to see how far he could push it. And he made a good point about how the scanner is, and we found this out with your Arctic thing, the scanner is you know, sufficient, but it's how you do your scan and how you stitch the scan together and how you clean it up and how you set it up. There's a lot of stuff that's not just, it's not like a camera where you just push the button. Obviously you can take a functional photo with a camera, but a good photographer is not just snapping. They're in the right
Right.
place. They're thinking about angles and lights and depth of field and all this kind of stuff. And it's a bit like that with scanning as well. Like you can do great things with a, you know, an average scanner. And similarly, you can get a brand new great scanner and not do a great job with it because you've got to work to the requirements of the scanner, and
Yeah, I've
you'll do it
with
50 times to figure it out.
yeah with the the Pop 2, the RevoPoint Pop 2. You know, it's this early generation of their scanner. We each have one. I don't know if you still have yours or not, but
Yeah, I've got
I
mine.
get I get great results with it. I mean,
Yeah.
really good results. It doesn't capture skin pores and skin texture the way the Artex Spider does, but Christ, you know, you don't need that.
No, no, a lot of the times you really don't. I've been using my Scan Pro HD, I think it is. Um, and that's again that you can get mixed results with that, but it's just knowing how to you basically got to be prepared to do it wrong a lot of times and not be disheartened by it, but also actively investigate why it's not giving you the results you want. You've got to trust the process. And it takes a lot of time and effort. And I think that's what Brian's a good example of somebody that will just keep at it and not be broken by something, which is
Mm-hmm.
not common nowadays.
Yeah, no, I was about to break down when we were trying to figure out how to get the spider to
Well, that was after a
do what
day of
we
doing
wanted.
it as well. It wasn't like, but it's a whole new language. This is the thing that all of these things belong to other industries that have their own language. And the whole digital world is very much like that for us, I think. You know, the automotive industry and aero industries, they've all been doing stuff like this for years. And so people who are involved in that kind of stuff know those things. And we come in here with our little floppy silicon bits, and suddenly we have to learn all this big boy stuff. And it's kind of scary at first until it becomes a language that you can speak, and then it becomes, available to you.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's some really good parts in this. It's not a particularly ZBrush heavy conversation. Um, this one, it's mostly about molds, but it's inevitable the ZBrush does come into it. And I'm I'm concerned that we spend a lot of time talking about the digital side of things, but it's very hard to not because it's making such an impact in the practical world.
Yeah, it's here to stay. It's part of the workflow now.
Mm.
And you know, either use it or don't use it,
Yeah. Oh,
as we've said before.
we had a little job recently, show. It was a low budget thing. A mate of mine, I got him to make the pieces because I didn't have time to do it. But it was a little job with they wanted some faceless people, very low budget thing. And so what I did was to do. I've seen it done before, and we did some on I think on Doctor Who. I think Rob Mayer was running the masks for this, but he made a really cool. He had a really good way of making faceless masks. It was a latex mask, but it finishes lower than the jaw, so there's a
Yeah.
return under here, and that's where the air goes in and out.
Uh,
You don't have any visible holes in the front. But it's got to be enough of a gap that when someone breathes, the thing doesn't compress in and out when they inhale and exhale. Um, and he did this really cool thing with the eye holes where he would put pins into the eyes of the sculpt and then mold it with the pins in place. So when you took the sculpt out, the pins were sticking out in the right place. Then when you cast your latex, the mask comes out with the holes in the right place. And I've never seen that done before. It's a really, really neat trick. It's such an obvious
hmm.
one when you think about it, because trying to put pinholes exactly the right size in latex is not easy. So it's easy to cast them without, with the pins in the right place because the latex doesn't soak into the pins. So that was a really good thing that he did. And I did something similar for this really low budget job, but I didn't have time to do it the whole old school way. So what I did was I got 3 or 4 head scans that I've got, and
Yeah.
I stacked them on top of each other to make an average form. and then smoothed it over, and then made that my core. And then I sculpted in ZBrush a smooth face over the whole thing.
I'd love to see how you did that, how you combined
I
this
literally just
from the 3D scan store.
no, just scans that I've taken in the past.
Okay.
So I just got 3 average heads. I put like someone that was kind of round, someone was kind of long, and some face that was kind of thin. And I stuck them all together. I centered them and lined them up. So they were roughly, the eyes and the nose and the mouth and the ears were roughly in the same place, but there's a, overlap.
Yeah.
And then fuse that together, output that as a separate form, and then smooth it over, and then sculpt it on top of that. So I've got a blank face that fits at least 3 people. So that's a good average. Do you know what I mean? And then I made a slightly smaller version for the children. So I just basically scaled it down, and I just printed these heads in PLA, passed them over to James Adams, and then he molded them in plaster so we could get latex masks out. So it was a really, really quick thing to do, really. It took like 6-7 hours to print, but that just happened overnight. And then in the morning, I popped these 2 things over to James, and then he molded them in plaster. And then because they were hollow PLAs, he could heat them up with a hairdryer and then pull them out. And they were fine. So he could make another set of molds using plaster again. So we had 4 molds, and then they were able to brush latex in and latex and tissue to build up, masks very quickly. And it was
Cool.
a really good merge of like a mix of like the old school technique and the digital. I think in the end they wanted holes in the mouth so that they could breathe more easily and get more air in, and then they just fixed that in post. So it was a weird mix of, digital and practical. But it was such a simple thing to do from my point of view, because I didn't have to sculpt anything. I sculpted it digitally, but I didn't have to make any mess. I could do it on my iPad, and it was really cool. And it's like, it felt like one of the first little jobs. And this is why I like doing little jobs like this, where there's not as much risk involved. There's enough time because they've not got the budget, so they have to give you the time. And you have an idea about how you're going to do it, and you try something out and it kind of works, and you're like, oh, that's really cool. And you wouldn't dream of doing that on a bigger job necessarily, but it's how you sort of get familiar with things and get faster with things. And it was a really nice, fun thing to do. So yeah, that happened. That was good. Yeah,
I like it.
I send you pictures of the masks. They work really well, and they were just latex, very, very cheap really, and like half a roll of filament, and
old school still works.
Couple of kilos of plaster, and you're good to go.
Very well. Yeah,
it does. It's what you do with it that counts. So yeah, so that was a fun thing. But anyway, so I guess we should stop waffling and listen to our chat with Brian Best. It was a good chat, man. It went on for a couple.
Yes, yeah. It was very entertaining and informative.
So yeah, there you go.
Brian Best.
When we did the podcast with Rob Freitas, I should have brought it with me. I've got a Bronze Age axe head that my dad found. And the reason I brought it along was because it had a seam line on it. And I said, look at this. This thing is like 5,000 years old or whatever. It's got a fucking seam line on it. It doesn't really matter to the integrity of an axe head. But I'm like, we're still dealing with seams to this day from a mold making point of view. And even with printers, you just have thousands of the little seams. So it's still a thing.
It's still a mold.
It's still a thing.
Whether it was whacked out of stone or chiseled out of wood.
Yeah.
That you're gonna melt a piece of glass over to make a decorative bowl of some sort. You still need to have a model and a mold.
Well, this is one of the things that I found fascinating about the mold making. I've been looking at the historic. I can never pronounce the word, even though I've got a book on it. I want to say metallurgy, but it doesn't sound metallurgy. Metallurgy. It just doesn't sound right any which way you say it.
It's metallurgy.
So you've got the Bronze Age, right?
Yeah.
So they've got this bronze compound. But the first molds wouldn't have been bronze molds. They did start making bronze molds, but you start with your stone molds. You carve a reverse in, you cast your bronze.
Well, it's tough. It's tough to cast bronze into a bronze mold because
it's bronze. But they did.
Wow.
And you should see it. But the point I was trying to make is the Bronze Age depended on a very, very good understanding of the Stone Age stuff in order for the bronze stuff to happen. And there's a comparison to be made with molds and mold making because you're doing stuff digitally. We were saying earlier, you've got to have that background information of how mold works, how gravity works, how undercuts work, how material is going to respond. You need that information in your head when you're designing stuff digitally because it's still a mold. And I'm grateful that I did the hands-up stuff.
But the materials have changed.
I'm sure I've seen in one museum somewhere, like the British Museum of National History or something like that, a mould, but it was made out of wood. And it was of a ball or something like that. And it obviously carved one half, and then the other half would have had to have been carved freestyle to fit the other half. And I was,
How do you know it?
I was just looking at it, like, going, like, oh my God, like the amount of work to put into making that in wood. It's just like doing it in stone, obviously, same deal.
My great uncle on my mother's side had a lumber mill in Columbus, Ohio. And some of the guys working in the mill, 8 fingers, missing fingers, the life of working in a lumber mill. But when they weren't really on busy things, we have them on our wall. And I've got some pictures that we can put up. They would hand carve these molds for picture frames with, ornate, fleur-de-lis and roses and all this stuff into pieces of wood that they would then pour plaster into that would decorate picture frames. Hand by hand, and it's like looked like it was machined. Incredible skill.
Yeah, a lot of skill to do that and keep it consistent over the length of the frame.
But essentially, the flat molds that we make, they would carve out of pieces of wood that had been milled and put together, and then they would carve these pieces and just plaster and then scrape it off, and then be able to pop these pieces out and glue them to the beveled, angled wood frames. Beautiful stuff. So you see all these ornate frames that if they weren't initially carved in the wood, they were these plaster pieces that you see people doing for home restorations of ancient, cornice work and stuff. But we've got a bunch of these at home, and they're marvels.
Always fascinates me and amazes me, like different techniques that you see, like until you see, speaking from myself, from my own perspective, I say, until I see something done, I'm not that great at working out myself, you know what I mean? I have to have some spark, I have to see somebody else do something and then go, hold on a minute, you could adapt that and change that and tweak that thing and get to there. The first moulds I ever made, I didn't know what a mould was. I had no idea what a mould was, but I wanted to make Mogwais from Gremlins. Yeah, that was like my thing. So I was like 15, 16 years old. A lot of people I've met in this industry doing creatures, whatever, I'd already worked out how to make moulds really young. But I was about 15, 16, maybe even 17.
Let's put that in context. That what year that would have been, because we're about the same age.
Yeah,
so
okay. This is like sort of about 19.
87?
No, this is about 1992.
Right.
93. I was born in 75. So is that right?
Yeah, I'm 73.
It's so basically, like at the time, I was like sort of getting a little bit of clay from college every year. I had no idea how much clay was. So every time I sculpted something in clay, I would take a little bit, like that was about the size of like a small tomato home with me of clay, until I had built up enough clay to be able to sculpt something that was a Mogwai size, with the armature, quite fittingly, was a can.
It's a real Andy Dufresne way of doing it.
It was the armature was a can of Coca-Cola in the middle of this. So they would have these Mogwais with this big tube Coca-Cola shaped like tummy, basically. Because I didn't have enough clay. But I would sculpt all of that stuff, and then I had no idea what a clay wall was.
Did you ever take pictures of those?
I've got video footage.
Really?
Yeah, there was... when I was younger, I didn't really have much money at all. I'd bought a computer, I maxed out most of my money on that. And my grandma had passed away and left me a very small amount of money. And I just was like, but it was enough to buy a video camera. So it was a fair amount of money in that respect. And a lot of other people would just blow that money on stuff, clothes, whatever. And I just thought, well, I could buy film for a camera and do loads of photographs of my work that I was planning. I was planning to start building up a portfolio, even though I barely knew what a portfolio was.
But you knew what you wanted to do at that time.
Yeah,
right?
I'd say I sort of wanted to do creatures and makeup. My parents had said, don't do it. I was also studying computer graphics at the time. Thinking that was probably more likely.
When you started the 3D with the Amiga?
Yeah, so I was using an Amiga, and I basically worked at I worked at I'm going off on a tangent here, but I worked at a Laser Quest game facility doing H.R. Geiger type drawings all over their walls at a very low paid amount of money to paint their whole interior. And at the back of it,
there's your portfolio right there.
Yeah, for airbrushing. So I'd saved up about £400, which was enough to buy an Amiga computer. I bought that. All the software I got was cracked. So it was all free software, and I learned how to use all those 3D packages. Got very good at it. Nearly got into the games industry. But in between doing that, that was my night work. My night work was doing computer work and then setting stuff rendering at night. And my day work, I was at sixth form college at this point, just started sixth form college. So I'd be going there to try to pass all the GCSEs I'd failed at school. So I was doing that and some A-levels. And then in between lessons, I would like come home and start experimenting with latex, plaster, clay, mogwais, so on. And but how I used to make my molds, and this is back onto that, I would get like my sculpt of my mogwai, and I would sort of roughly inside of a cardboard box with some old bits of polystyrene and a plastic bag, roughly make the shape of the mogwai and negative in the bag as much as I can. Then I would mix up some plaster to a sort of relatively thicker like sort of mixture, so it wasn't too runny. I would cover quickly all the face of the mogwai of the sculpture, and then I would pour it in the bag, and then I would dip and hold the sculpture inside of that mix until the plaster went off, and like roughly to the halfway line. And obviously wobbling hand of a 16-year-old child or whatever,
it's not getting heavy after a while.
It gets heavy. You're like, oh, and eventually the plaster picks up and you think, oh, it's kind of good, but you're going to get a viscous on that. So then I'd have a viscous line curved right where you don't want it on your mold. Sometimes at first I would just like mold out. I'd get Vaseline, cover it on the other half, or vegetable oil. Tried that, it doesn't work. But Vaseline eventually ended up on at that time because I hadn't learned clear slip. And then I would back the mold with the second half, open the mold and have a mold for making a latex pour. No idea what I was doing. And then eventually I started breaking off the viscous line carefully, and then doing the second half of the mold, started getting seams a little bit better, tidy up the sculpt. And that's how I started making them molds. Completely clueless to how to do it. And once I'd finished at sort of art college, my teacher was like, oh, you're very good at 3D. Should do that. At the time I was like, I only like drawing. That's all I was into. I wanted to work for a company maybe doing either computer graphics or typesetting or magazine covers, like the TV guide cover and all of the writing. And I thought that's where I would end up doing something along those lines. I did work experience at printers, and I was like, yeah, I think that's my life. If I don't kind of get what I really want, which was film or gaming industry. So anyway, my teacher was really pushing me to do 3D and kept doing it, and I was like, well, I'm not very good at it because it was new to me. I wasn't very good at it, but she's seen something in me and really pushed me.
Pretty new to everybody at that time.
Yeah, well, this was 3D traditional, just sculpting. This was 3D graphics at that point. No, the college courses weren't even teaching that then. I was doing more advanced computer stuff at home than any course was doing at that time, to the point where I went to my next college, which was Newcastle Art College, and they had a 3D. I did a foundation course there where you were supposed to learn each area of art. When I went to visit the college, this was 1993, 94, they were basically like kind of saying to me, yeah, we do a bit of graphic design, a bit of 3D modeling, a bit of textiles, fine art, and there's computers. And I was like, brilliant, I'm all in. It's everything I want to do in one course, this foundation course for 1 year. Took the course. 6 months, you wait 6 months to finish college, and then you go on that course. By the time I turned up, they went, oh, we've scrapped the computer bit because it's like, it's kind of outdated now. Nobody's really going to be doing that. Like, and it was so like kind of secondary computer stuff back then. They were just like, oh, it's just useless compared to the real arts. So they dropped that bit, and I was a bit gutted. So anyway, I continued doing my computer stuff at home because of that, and doing a mix of them both. And at that college as well, I already knew from my sixth form college, from my art teacher, there was 2 model making courses in existence, one at Bournemouth and one at Sunderland at the time. And I had to choose which one I went to, and Sunderland was too close to home, so I picked Bournemouth. And went off to study a 2-year modelling HND in the end. And on that course, I met a couple of guys, one in particular called Jamie, and he was putting clear walls on his sculpts. He was sculpting like goblin masks and whatever and all these things. And I remember walking up to him doing a clear wall, and he was clear on clear. There was no silver sprays, there was no barriers. And I was just looking at how long he spent putting a clear wall on, which was probably maybe an hour or two. It was no time whatsoever. And thought, you're crazy. You know, why spend that long doing a clear wall? And I was like, I just did not understand it. And he was tooling it, doing it all properly how you should do. And there's me. I kept my thing, and I was making a monkey at the time. I grabbed this monkey, and my clear walls was just like getting sausages and squishing them onto the sculpt. That was my clear wall, because I knew clear walls existed at that point because I'd seen him do them. So I just got big rolling bits of clear out and squashing them on like sausages, putting a couple of them on, and I'd mould half the mould, stick a couple of thumbs in it for keys. And those moulds are unrecognisable. I've got photographs of them. I have to show you them one day. They're unrecognisable as mouldings. They just look like you've got a load of plaster and threw it up in the sky and it's landed on a model, and you've done that for like 4 hours. It was like how I knew where to put a chisel in to open that mould, I do not know. And there's the other guy, Jamie, doing these beautiful moulds, and I still never got it. I don't think I got it till I left college, like 2 years later. And then I went into industry and then started to see people moulding the same way as Jamie was doing it. And I was just like, oh, yeah, okay, I better sort of do this properly.
Yeah, and then, boy, did you get it.
Yeah, it took a bit of time.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
It's fascinating you said about the computer thing kind of stopped up, because that would have been around the time Jurassic Park came out.
90,
I think that might have been
94, that was Sequest and Babylon 5.
And T2,
Yeah.
I mean, that's when people started to really sit up and take notice.
Yeah.
The
And
computers
that's-
were going to be a thing.
And that's the thing. Like I was running off an Amiga 1200 at this point. I'd upgraded from a 500 to a 1200. Like maybe Christmas. I had a bit of Christmas money to get that computer. Sold my other one, and so I was learning on an Amiga. And very quick, I learned that we used Amigas for Babylon. What was the show called again?
Babylon 5.
Babylon 5. Yeah, they were using Amigas, but they were using Amiga.
That's what the video. That's how I got into 3D in the
Right.
first place. Is new company called NewTek had developed this desktop video production. They developed what they called the video toaster. It was a computer-driven switcher that had a 3D animation package built into it called Lightwave.
Mm-hmm.
And I started using that because you could do, 3D logos and fly around and do some pretty cool stuff.
Johnny Clark was always going about
But it was
Lightwave.
really,
If I remember that word, it's so
it was
embedded.
really early on in the 3D graphics era, and this is pretty freaking cool. I like this, and turned out I was pretty good at it, and I eventually, turned it all into a 3D animation business as opposed to a video production company, and that's how I do it. This was in 92, I think, 91 or 92
Wow, really?
when I got into Lightwave.
Yeah, so I was reading about those guys in the States doing that stuff for that show and thinking, well, I've got an Amiga. Oh, but there's Amiga 2000.
You were doing
4000.
3D stuff with it. Because I've got a
Well,
Fangoria with
yeah.
who did
It was John Vulich.
John Vulich, yeah, from Optic Nerve. And they were doing designs of zombies on an Amiga.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. So at first I was using Deluxe Paint, so it was all 2D.
Yes.
And things that looked 3D, but they were done in 2D. So I was doing a lot of that. A lot of clever stuff to push the maximum out, which is what all those games companies were doing at that time as well. They were using very clever little techniques and rotoscoping and different things. So we'd put bits of transparent paper, tracing paper on the TV, trace things, and then lay it over there. And literally, you had to draw with a mouse, and none of us could afford a pen back then.
Yeah, like
And it was
with a brick.
And it was dot by dot. You would just draw dot by dot through the tracing paper, and you would just rotoscope things like that. All doing it blind, not knowing how any of the professional companies did it. It turned out a lot of those companies were doing very similar methods. I started doing 3D stuff, but it was very limited. You'd run out of memory. Like little things like back then, if you had an object, like if I built a snowman, for example, if you were to, you'd have to put key points all the way around that snowman to move the camera around it. So
just a simple 360-degree rotation to render that animation. That's maybe,
so you'd have
maybe a 10-second rotation.
Yeah, you'd have to put like 16 key points around it for the camera move, and it would just get to like 0.8 and go out of memory, because it would take so much memory to like calculate those movements between each key point. And then I found out, well, actually, if I move the model rather than the cameras, I can do it in like free, because I can just have that point, or something like that. And you would get the full 3D thing with 3 points, and then I could see, you were like working out little weird cheats of how to get things done.
Well, talk about T2, the sequence where the prison guard comes up out of the tile floor. Mm-hmm. That simple sequence took them a month to render.
Right. I remember reading about there's an incredible making of on the Tron DVD, and Steven Leisberger, who was the guy that's kind of just a mad genius, absolute mad genius who did that movie. He's talking about how they used something like either a quarter or a third of the entire computer facilities that they could find in America at that time to do all their rendering for Tron, which was about 2 minutes, if that, of CG. He went, but not the military stuff. He said the military had their own stuff. He went, but they had to use so much stuff, and they said if one render failed, that was cut from the movie. They didn't have time to render it again, so they had to make sure every shot worked. And then ultimately what happened with that, when they then went to match it up with their shots, the computers back then didn't deal with lens distortion. So none of the CG stuff they'd meticulously worked out, went with the film they shot. Yeah. So they had to then cut out stuff and cut and paste every shot like a piece of animation.
Yeah, every now and then, because of the processor speed and memory, you'd render this whole sequence and you play it back, and there'd be a frame missing. It'd just be blank. Halfway through the sequence, it's just not there.
So bizarre how it used to be. And like ultimately, and this comes back to ZBrush later down the line and computers that I use now down the line. But ultimately, once I'd sort of like started doing that stuff, I thought, well, maybe I could get into the computer graphics industry. And basically, a big video games company at the time called Psygnosis that made a game called Lemmings and Walker and a few things. They were interviewing new people to be in the Newcastle area, basically, which is where I grew up. So it was an article in the magazine my mum put me onto, went, oh, look, these guys are after some animators. You could do that. And of course I was 16 years old, naive, 17, maybe 18 or something, and I was thinking, yeah, I could do that. So I was kind of like, I contacted them and they said, send us your stuff. I put a disc together of all my 2D and 3D work, sent them it. They sent me a message straight back on, it was all through the post, obviously. Yeah. I could barely afford the stamps at the stage, because I blew all my money on clay and plaster and computer gear. And they were, send us some more things. Could you do a walk cycle of a character at like 16 colours, 15 frames per second or something, and this certain pixel height and width of a character just walking along? We just want to see you do a walk cycle. So that night, I got the letter. That whole night, I stayed up all night as a young kid doing that walk cycle.
Your heart's probably pounding.
Yeah,
like this is going somewhere.
And I had it in the post by the next day, and then they were like, 2 days later, I get a reply. Great, could you now do this? And they asked me to just do loads of different tests, over about four basically interviews via the post. And eventually they were like, yeah, we love all your stuff. Come in for the final interview. And I was like, amazing. And at the time, I thought, amazing, I could move out of the house, I could get my own flat, I was young and sort of optimistic to the future of that, and I was like, I was blown away. And I basically immediately kind of got a friend to give me a lift for the interview. I put all my art, traditional art, all in a portfolio, because I said, bring all your art as well. I took it all there. And like I say, I was about between the age of 16 and 18 or something. But at that time I was tiny. I looked really small and I looked really young. I could never get in nightclubs. I could never go out when friends started going out drinking. I could never join them. So I turned up at this interview, rang on the doorbell. The guy answers the door and he just looks at me, and I knew I didn't have the job. I knew there's no way I was getting that job. And there was a guy, he's probably 25, 30. And he just looked at me and went, could I help you? And I was like, yeah, I'm here for the interview. And he was like, you're here for the interview, sort of type thing. I was like, yeah. He went, okay, come in. And I went in, and back then there was games companies. They worked from like barns and houses. They never worked in a big corporate environment. So because they were expanding, they were obviously set 4 guys up in different houses, one in Glasgow, one in Newcastle, one London somewhere, and so on. Psygnosis had big sort of aims at this point. So anyway, I went in there, I recognised a few of their names from games when I got introduced to them. They actually gave me a really good interview for the age they were and the age I was, and they were very sensitive around me, I think, and they were very good. But ultimately, they would put my stuff on a screen, and I was working on the CRT screen.
Yeah.
All the gradients and all the colours would be wrong on a proper monitor, and they would be like, oh, we wondered why. Because I would explain I don't have the proper equipment, and they were like, oh, we wondered why the gradients of the sky were so like crazy, but everything else you did was so top level. And I was like, oh, on my TV, that looks perfect. And they were like, yeah, you need to quit that. You need to buy a monitor. And I'm like, at the time, monitors were a few £100s. And they were like, you're going to need this scanning thing. You're going to need this thing. You're going to need that thing. They basically, when I walked out of the interview, they went, oh, you're not ready yet, but get in touch with us in a few years' time. And they were like, this is the equipment you need to buy. And that was when I realised they all brought their own equipment to the show. I've always thought as a child, you go to work for a company and they provide you with all of the tools and all of the means to do that job. I realised everyone in that company bought their own stuff. Chances are they were probably quite wealthy kids that could afford to buy the stuff, I had a guess. So anyway, I walked out that interview and I just thought, I'm quitting CG. I thought, that's it, it's over. I'm never doing it again. I can't afford it.
It was a good education, though.
Yeah, it was brilliant. So I was kind of like, so I walked away, got my lift back. My friend said I didn't get the job. But that's all right. And then I just started hammering, making like creatures, monsters, gore stuff,
but
plaster
that
walls.
was a hard lesson to learn, and the fact that that's how you responded to it. I mean, you were probably down for a bit, but you came back swinging. And that's a big part of who you are, and I think that's something that
come back
everybody needs to
swimming.
have.
Come back swinging in another area, though. That's the thing. I kind of, that was, like I say, that was the sort of early 90s. I never got a computer again. I didn't own a computer again. The Amiga, I give it to a charity shop pretty soon after. And
if you still had it, it would be worth a fortune.
I know. Well, I bought another one later on. There was one right there. So basically, I just canned it. And then I went to art college, didn't have a computer. The first time I bought a computer again was on Harry Potter, the first Harry Potter movie. So that was like 2000 or something. So I had a big hiatus of 7 years of not even touching a keyboard. I was just like, anytime I had to do a dissertation for college, I'd use the library computers. I'd used the internet a little bit. I knew some friends. I was still geeking out. I knew friends who were on the computer course at the university. I was at the art college doing another project. All of the guys, in fact, I lived with were all computer guys. Every Friday night, we'd all get drunk, go out partying, and then sneak underneath the security desk at the university and go into the... So this was 94, I believe. We'd sneak into the computer room and we'd stay in there all night. We wouldn't even go out to the toilet if we could avoid it because we didn't want the security guard to kick us out. And we'd be in there from like all night until it got daylight on the internet, because there was this new thing called the internet out, which was black and white. Everything on the internet was black and white. Anything you looked up you couldn't find, so you type in like sea monkeys would be something I'd type in. Nothing on the internet about sea monkeys existed. You type in monorails, which I had a college project on, loads of stuff on monorails. Type in Star Wars, the only thing you could find was the script. That's how basic the internet was when we were using it. So I dabbled on the internet and I liked that. And that was like 6 years later when we were on Harry Potter. Amazon started, eBay was getting a bit good traction. So
MySpace was social media.
So I was kind of like, MySpace wasn't. Oh, was it out in 1994? Sorry, 2000.
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, okay. So it's eventually I ended up buying another computer, and that's all I used it for. MySpace, pretty much. Invoices. That was it. I eventually delved into a bit of editing. I learned Premiere, so I could like edit my own like sort of bits of video footage, old video footage, and that was it yet again. And I only used a computer for that until 5 years ago. And then 5 years ago, 6 years ago maybe, Prusa started making good printers. People had Prusas at work. 2-3 years before that, they were all had these Ultimakers that looked like they were like laser cut out of wood.
Plastic.
They were like wood, and it looked like it was laser cut out. Frames and stuff.
It was.
And I was like, this thing looks like it's out of Doc Emmett Brown's like kind of garage or something. This looks so complicated. I just couldn't get my head around it. And you had to build your own. But then Prusa come out, and you could buy it as a kit or you could buy it as a self-built. And one of the mechanics basically just went, if you want to start getting into 3D again and you want to start learning that, Prusa's wherever it's at, and you went, and don't buy your one pre-built, buy your one that's a kit, and then you'll learn how the machine works by putting it together. And if something goes wrong, you're not scared to take it apart. And I was like, there was a guy called Josh Lee, incredible mechanical designer on the movies, who I believe went to college with you guys.
Yeah, he was a year above me, I think.
Yeah, above you. Oh, he's a genius. So like Josh was basically just like, yeah, that's what you need to get one of them. So I bought a 3D printer before I even had a computer set up to run it. Downloaded files from Thingiverse.
Yeah, these look like same. Like I've got a Lulzbot Taz 6 that they call the rep wrap, where it's like a self-replicating kind of thing, where all of the non-metal pieces were actually printed on the same printer that it's being used on.
It's quite attractive knowing that, isn't it? It's kind of like you. It's also like it's a big move for the printer company to sell their machine, knowing that it was printed on one of their machines or a prototype of their machine that kept evolving. Yeah. Around that time, I think that documentary come out, Print the Legend. I'm not sure if you've seen that documentary. Incredible. Discussing a few of the young kids building 3D printers in their bedrooms. One guy's doing resin printers, one guy's doing filament printers. And they just look like kind of C3PO's interiors. So they're all like kind of just loose wires everywhere and crazy contraptions. And I watched that when I had a little accident in hospital, and I watched a whole load of things, that being one of them. And that was, again, I was like a real eye-opener, that documentary. And I was kind of like, I need to move into that. So I bought one Prusa, downloaded loads of files, and I just kept sort of like printing things and working out how a printer worked. Then again, same as you, Stu, we got Fusion 360. Everyone was jumping on Fusion 360 AutoCAD because it was a free package you could get at the time. Everyone said it was simple to learn. I found a guy who I think I put you onto, who's an incredible educator on YouTube.
Swedish guy.
He I can't remember, but he was the guy I followed, and I learned a lot from him. But I just could not get a grip to that package, and I thought, oh my god, I bought this printer.
Yeah,
3D stuff is like it was CAD, and I was like, I don't know CAD. It had all these things called constraints, which I never got my head around the constraints. I'm sure I could if I went back to it. So I built like a glasses case. I built a couple of little sushi boxes, and that was about as far as I got. I loved parametric model making within it, like where you can like change dimensions and everything has a knock-on domino effect. That was really attractive to me. I just couldn't get it. And then I thought, right, I'm going to get a ZBrush. So I didn't want to do the 30-day trial of ZBrush. I didn't want to do that at all because I thought, well, I'm only going to get 2 hours an evening here and 1 hour here, and then not go on it for a week.
Yeah, and the 30-day trial is done before you
have
have a chance to do anything.
Suddenly a 30-day trial is an 18-hour trial.
Yeah, you're anxiously looking at the remaining time.
Yeah, and I thought that's an unfair way of using their product.
Should be time. Should have like a timer. So
yeah,
you
exactly.
Clock your hours.
So of course I did the naughty thing. I got a bootleg copy of it, put it on my computer, started to learn it, and I couldn't drop it. I was on it for 30 days. Every night I was on it till 4 a.m, going to bed, having 2-3 hours sleep, and then going to work on Star Wars the next day, doing sort of like my day job, knackered. But I could do my day job with my eyes closed anyway, pretty much at that point. So it wasn't really that much of a problem. Then I'd go home again the next night, be obsessed with ZBrush. And I did that like for 30 days. And at the moment, I don't even think 30 days was up. And I was like, I'm buying this package. And I didn't even want to rent it. I just bought that package outright and started learning ZBrush. And kind of that was probably about 5 years ago at that point I started learning it. And the technicalities of that package are obviously quite deep.
But for the stuff that we're doing, the depth of it, we only need to scratch the surface of it to accomplish what we're doing.
A lot of people I talk to, especially sculptors in ZBrush, there's a different variants, but some sculptors will just say, I use like 3 brushes.
Yeah.
And I use 3 or 4 alphas. Maybe I do use a handful of more alphas. But essentially, I pretty much do everything with just 3 or 4 brushes and start with a big bowl, and that's all they do. And I'll be talking to them going, oh, do you remesh and do you reproject your thing? And they'll go, what's that? Some of the cleverest sculptors I've ever met, sculpted the most genius things, are like that, with like barely touching anything. And I'm like, oh my God. And is it Michael Pavlich, the guy? Is it Pavlich? Do you pronounce his second name? The guy on YouTube who's like a ZBrush genius, ZBrush guru.
Don't know. I got Maddie Spencer's intro to ZBrush from on the Nauman school, and just it's like 56 or close to 60 videos, so it's it's a lot of hours of training and goes through everything. Just the first 3 videos alone changed my entire universe.
There was one video I found first, and it was a guy. He only had about 4 videos on the entire of YouTube, but he showed how to open ZBrush, quickly cobble something together with Z-spheres, which is the only time I've ever used Z-spheres was watching his demo, and it was incredibly good, but I ended up just doing it a different way afterwards as you do. But he did his thing with Z-spheres. He showed how to make like a sort of tauntaun head. It was like a goat head, put eyes in it, pull horns on it, mirror things, mirror and weld, like the few basic things.
Yeah.
It was about half an hour video. I spent 4 hours doing that video, and I did that same video every night for about 4 nights until I got those basic elements. And I was like, right, that's it, I've got that basic thing. The next week I sculpted a full gremlin based upon that. I didn't know about any of the remeshing booleans. I didn't know about any of the other complicated things. I just knew, maybe I knew about remeshing. I knew subdivisions and so on. But I learned a lot from that. And then I think it's Pavlich, how you pronounce his second name. But that other guy on YouTube, he does most of the videos. I just started cramming his videos at a college course, just watching every single one. And he talks like he's like proper freight train. So you have to pause it every 30 seconds.
That's what I like about Maddie Spencer, is she's so
methodical,
patient. She gets it that she
speaks at the rate you can understand.
Yeah, and she repeats herself. She doesn't presume that you are going to pause it and rewind and watch it again. She repeats it and explains why she's doing something, not just what she's doing, which I think is really important. The why we do stuff is maybe more important than the how.
Yeah. This guy's much of the same. He's incredible. There's not one video I've watched where he doesn't tell you what button he's pressing or what menu it's within. So you'll always, and you're listening to it, it's like listening to somebody reading a telephone directory, right? He's so fast, he's so good. He knows that package inside and out. And like, so I'd have to pause every 30 seconds when I was starting. I watched every single video he did, and then once I'd exhausted all his videos, I then started to just, in his hundreds of videos out there on Z model, everything, and I just went through everything he did and I was taking notes. I was doing it during my lunch hours, breaks, evenings. Something I was putting on the full TV in the living room, watching it, boring my kids like with that on in the background. And then I just got obsessed with watching his videos. And weirdly, he never makes any mistakes, nothing. He's so flawless. Then I started watching his live videos where he's building something live. And then suddenly he's making mistakes. He's also got a Q&A on the side of his screen, like a lot of those YouTubers answering questions. And some people, he's going, how do you do this? And he'll go, actually, I don't know. Oh, somebody on the side has just told me you do it this way. So I suddenly noticed there was things he didn't know. And there was people that would input from the comments. He would make mistakes and he would do things and go, oh, that didn't work out, but I could try this way. And then he'd go, oh, I've done another mistake. I could try it that way. Oh, there's this way or that way. And even if he didn't make a mistake, he'd do that quite often. There's another way, another way. And I'm the same as I don't just like knowing one way of doing something. I like to know
everything.
5 different.
But with
reasons.
ZBrush, there's a sort of a certain amount you need to know just to use it.
Yeah.
But you just get used to the idea. It's kind of like a supermarket. Like you can go shopping, you get the 40 items you know you're going to need. You don't have to try everything in the supermarket. There's 20,000 items. You don't have to try everything to go shopping. But you know that if you want to change your cornflakes or get a different kind of bread, that they exist in multitude. And other people go in there and buy 40 different items that you never buy. And that's what ZBrush is like. There's all this stuff, and it doesn't matter that you don't know it all. And I think when we all started out, you think you need to know it all.
Yeah.
And you don't.
Yeah.
You just need to know what you need to know. But you also need to have a reason for using it.
It's also the way it is with not just with ZBrush, but with everything. You know, there's maybe a half dozen ways to do it all. And then I think that's why the why of it is so important, not just the how, because, you know, why do you want to use pottery plaster for this mold instead of plaster of Paris or hydrocal or jesmonite? You know, that's, you know, what do you want to do? Why use a water clay instead of an oil clay, or why silicone instead of gelatin or foam latex over this material? It's, you know, what's the end use? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's probably very similar to you, probably similar to a lot of people I've met. Sometimes you get bored as well and you just think, I can't be bothered to use clay today. I just want to use shim. Or and you just do it to change the scenery, just like you drive a different route home and then one evening to see a different route. Just to mix it up a little bit.
You know, I'll do that when I'll see a post on Instagram of like, oh, you know, playing cards as shims. Interesting. I want to try that and see.
I've noticed a lot more.
See how that works.
Yeah, I've noticed a lot more shim gets used in the States.
Yeah.
And I don't know why we use a lot more clay walls.
Well, what I found, this might be slightly sort of controversial, but what I found is like when I first started in the creature industry in about 1997, that seam on that mould, they wanted the best seams ever on their moulds. And like when I got hired, they looked at my moulds and were like, I've got a few people, probably yourself, but some other people were like, actually he's all right at doing mould, he's pretty good, his clean-up's quite tight, so on. And I got a little bit of a reputation quite early for being kind of caring of that seam. And that
how dare you?
And exactly. And the reason being, what I found is that no one scumbled. When I first entered the industry, I don't know if you ever seen it, I didn't even know what scumbling was.
I don't think I know what scumbling is.
Just like, I don't know if it was, I don't know who invented it.
Okay.
But
I didn't know the word.
Yeah, so they'd always go, when I worked with a lot of Americans, so we'd put a foam bondo layer on it or whatever.
Yeah,
and then it's kind of like, they would have different terminologies, but like here they would do, and sometimes called foam patching and different things. So scumbling, it would always be called here. But what we'd do, every single mould I ever did, and every single mould as anyone else I seen doing, was always, the seam was trimmed meticulously by a really skilled group of like art finishers.
A scrumbler.
And then they would use spatulas very fine and use just Cavasil, just mixing Cavasil, Prosade. That's how everything was seamed. Anything that had a step would be cut, trimmed, pushed back in a paste bit, cabo. Or it would be scrapped and remolded. It was so tight. Working for people like Danny Parker and Mark Coulier and people like that back in the day. Those seams just had to be perfect. There was no ifs or buts. They just had to be perfect, which is the reason why you suddenly got this influx of new mould makers replacing the union mould makers doing that sort of stuff.
Around 2000.
Around 2000, because we wouldn't get steps on our moulds. We wouldn't hairdryer speed everything up. We'd put less catalyst in, so things shrunk back less. Like sometimes people will say to me like, oh, what's the difference between a good mould and a bad mould? And I'm like, sometimes I've watched somebody make a bad mould, but they did everything right, but they missed a couple of beats. One example I remember Jonathan Clark telling me was, he went, watch how much spray wax people put on their things. And they would get a spray wax and go for like half an hour. And then they would land the second half. The second half would just pop, like when the X-Firm happened, because it would melt the wax, pop, and then you would have like a bad seam. And I remember Jonathan would just give it dust to wax, just go that's all it needs, especially on prosthetics. So you're getting all these people doing prosthetics with blown seams for foam latexes.
quick point, sir.
Uh-huh.
Something I've noticed, I don't know, you can confirm on that. Spray wax in the States, it's not really a thing.
No.
Wow.
And I don't know why. We get loads of J-wax and Mac wax.
Yeah.
We have an aerosol can with beeswax and a propellant, and it's really good for spraying
epoxy
and mold.
par film, the Price Driscoll epoxy par film is, it's paraffin.
What's
Well,
interesting?
it's good, but it's waxy. This dries.
Yeah.
This
That's the thing,
dries.
because the wax dries. When you then lam onto it, it's like a glue. And then when you lam onto it, and then an exotherm happens, as long as that exotherm's not too hot, it won't melt the wax. Therefore, the wax still acts like a glue. So it almost acts like an adhesive until you pop the mold, and then it pops easily because it
I want to
can.
get a couple cans of what you recommend before take home.
Yeah, get some in your luggage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To clarify on the scumbling, it's not something I did much of, but I remember it. They did a lot of animated. So you get someone to whip up some foam latex, and you have a cup with the gelling agent,
Right.
and then you'd snip, and then you might get big holes. Say there's air bubbles in there. They snip them out. Then they take a scoop of that foam latex, mix in some gelling agent, tool it in there, and as it gelled, they would press texture in, and then sit there with a hairdryer or heat gun and cure that bit.
I've done that
And
with.
then move on. And it might have a different name in the States.
Bubbles. Yeah, I just never
And
heard
this
that
is
name.
and this is where it's coming back, I might be fractionally responsible for why shim sometimes gets used a bit more. Maybe mold seams aren't done as well sometimes nowadays than what they used to be back then. And I went to we'd all worked on Blade 2 together. We had a really good time on Blade 2. Steve Johnson got on quite well with me on that job. And I think it was mainly because sometimes we'd go night clubbing at the end of the night, and I got to know him quite well, like going out clubbing and just having fun. He was a fun guy. So basically, he called me back up to go on to this film called League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. I thought, there's going to be like 20 people on this. So I got to the airport, no English people there. Like on Blade, I got to the airport, it would be you, Mark, who other people getting on the same plane to go and do vampire makeups. This time, no one at the airport. I'm like, okay, they must have gone on an earlier flight or whatever. Anyway, I landed in Prague, got there, met all of the Hyde crew at the time, Steve's crew. Incredibly talented, all of them, every single one of them. Blown away by all of them. Fabricators, kind of like sculptors.
Mark Burley,
everyone.
Tom Killeen, I think was there.
Todd wasn't on that. I think he might have worked on it, but he wasn't there. So you had kind of Tamara, you had kind of Sarah, names are slipping my mind, this is 20 odd years ago. Sarah Rubino,
Margaret Prentice.
Margaret Prentice, Mark Bowley, Dave Monzingo, kind of Jimmy Harahira, Eric Fiedler. I'm probably missing somebody out here, which is really bad.
Sorry, man. That was 20 years
I'm on
ago.
the spot. If I bashed up a picture on my computer, it would be there. Anyway, so I'm working with these incredibly skilled people. They're like brilliant, and they all took me under. They were a bit dubious of me the first week I was there, as you would be, and then they all took me under my wing and treated me like gold. I was like treated so well by them all. Loved it. It's one of my favourite jobs I ever had. And on that job, Margaret Prentice took me under her wing. I did a lot of makeups with her. She taught me how to do a lot of things like lay beards. She taught me how to lay beards on really fine hair. She taught me loads of stuff. She was so generous with her skills and that. Dave Monzingo, this guy, I'm like, who's this guy? What does he exactly do? Whatever. Just one night, I remember coming back from the workshop, from the sets, end of the day, probably we'd all done a 16-hour day or whatever. Dave Monzingo would get all the suits, put them all out. Everybody would put all the suits on drying rigs to dry them all out. Dave would just jump on them, repairing all the cuts, all the damage, all of the broken bits of foam, and he would just mix up foam mixes and scumble them on there. And I'm like, what's that? And he'd say, oh yeah, I'm foam patching. And I think he'd just say, I'm like, what's that? And then he'd get little tripod stands or brooms or whatever was kicking around the workshop, and he'd set them up with hairdryers, just blasting heat at any area he patched.
Yeah.
And he was just cooking the foam with hairdryers, like on patched areas. And it was always overinflated when it's foamed, when you're patching it. And I would look at it going, that's wacky. And then he'd stipple it back a bit with the texture, and it was still slightly overinflated. But when the foam dries, it shrinks back a bit. He just knew. He knew he was an artist with that
It'll
stuff.
shrink about 10%.
He was just an artist. And then you smooth surfaces of this hide suit, and you couldn't see where he and I would be tasked by Margaret sometimes she would do it, sometimes she'd task me with it, just patching up the paint job in them areas. She trusted me to do that. She taught me how to paint in the technique she was using, and that was another thing. Naphtha, rubber cement,
No packs.
pack, and I was like, what is this crazy paint job? The masks, like highly toxic, but it moved beautifully. Anyway, I seen all that stuff, come back to England, and I was like, man, these guys are like the future. They're doing like foam stuff. They're doing this rubber cement paint job. And I was talking to at the time, and I was like, man, that's ancient stuff. We stopped doing that years ago. He was kind of like, we don't foam paint. We just do better seams, better quality seams, and we use Cavasil. That's it. That's all that's needed. And I'm like, yeah, but wrinkles a bit funny sometimes, and the foam is perfect.
Yeah.
Blends.
Because the Cavasil won't stretch like the foam.
Yeah.
So,
and he was like, nah, we're not doing that. It's not needed. And him under, you didn't really need to. His stuff was so, his demands were so high, he never needed somebody to foam scumble, really, to be honest. But he still wouldn't have the rubber cement thing. I mentioned the rubber cement thing to Henrik Svensson, and he just flew with it. Harry Potter, other jobs, he started doing that. Yeah. And then the rest is history. Loads of people use that paint system now. Off the back of Henrik starting to use it a lot. And there was Freak Flex colours. There was these colours called Freak Flex. That's what Margaret used to use. I introduced them. Henrik got them. Not long after, within a few years, Henrik had evolved way beyond that and was doing other paint systems and other techniques and so on. But the foam scumbling started not far off of that. Around that time, maybe it was the werewolves and Harry Potter. Foam scumbling suddenly started happening. And then what I found, later down the line, you got some incredibly good foam guys, like who were doing the best scumbling ever. There's a lady called Serena, and she works a lot for Star Wars, doing like the best seaming, and she's incredible, so good. And then she has a team of another couple of people that do that stuff as well, and they're all incredible. I worked out very quick, and I got a bit disillusioned and a bit down at one point, thinking it doesn't really matter if I do a good job. If I do a good seam on a creature, you can have the guy over there do the worst seam in the world. And not that anybody was, but I mean, you could have the guy over there do the worst seam in the world, and nobody would know the difference. Anyone on set wouldn't know the difference. I was like, what's the point of me putting all that energy into making the best seams ever? It's just going to get cut right back and scumbled out by these amazing scumblers. And yeah, that's kind of like, and then I talked to a lot of people in America, and they said the reason they use shim so much is because they have such good foam guys. So it doesn't matter if that Hellboy suit is shimmed all the way up.
They just blanket floor.
Yeah, and that was a real eye opener. I was like, oh, okay, so like they were probably banging out their molds twice as quick as us because we were doing tight seams that weren't probably entirely necessary if you got a good foam crew. So,
well, you remember, I think it was the second Makeup Artist magazine. They did a feature on the Nutty Professor. It might be the first one. And you see pictures of the molds, the Nutty Professor molds, and Rick Baker's team, and they'd done a seam line right down the middle of the neck. And you're like, are you crazy? That's an insane place. But because the seams were so good, it didn't matter. But that makes perfect sense because you're not going to get the undercuts going that way like you would this way.
And also when the lighting's cast, it's more likely to cast a shadow on the side of the head than
true
the front. So there's probably like intentions there as well, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
I remember seeing those pictures, and I think everybody was taking them into the workshops and going, look at these.
That's another example of the why over the how.
Yes. Yeah. That's a great point, though, with the seam line there to catch light. I didn't even think about that.
But it depends on how it's lighting. I'm guessing somebody like Rick Baker works for the DP maybe on his stuff. Like a lot of us don't have that.
Very aware.
You're more likely to, even if it's a barely visible seam, I think it's going to be more noticeable on the side than.
But every so often you get things like that. You look at that Nutty Professor breakdown in them books, and you're looking at the bladders and everything, and you just think, it's like next level is not even the right word. It's just beyond level when you see some things that are something. Cut to probably about, I don't know, a couple of years later, we were doing seams right down the middle on all of the things on the Mummy, but they were a bit more forgiving. You could do that.
Mike Marino's the new Rick Baker, I think. Yeah, he's doing such amazing stuff.
To be honest, I'm like kind of, everyone I look at now, I'm not being funny here. I see Mike Marino stuff, amazing stuff. I see his stuff, it is amazing. I look at what Barry Gower's team's doing, BG Effects, and I'm just like, how can it get better than that?
Yeah.
And I look at what Mark Coulier is doing. I'm like, how can it get better than that? Every company I look at, all of the companies in the States, all the companies in Europe, all the companies in the UK, everywhere, everything I look at, I just like, I can't work out how they got that good and how you can improve on it. It's like it's hit its peak. Like you look at that, like that penguin makeup and things like that, you're just like.
But you can also go back and look at the original Wizard of Oz makeups, and I don't think anything being done today is better than that.
I saw it like 90 years ago, something like that.
Yeah, 1939.
Yeah.
38 when it was made, 39 when it came out.
They were incredible, the scarecrow.
Yeah,
it's beautiful.
It's
beautiful.
nuts.
Yeah. They're crazy, and you think like not long before that, which is some of my favourite makeups actually. I remember talking to Margaret Prentice about it, and it was the same. She was like some of her favourite makeups. That early, is it Westmore? I may be wrong on that. Those Alice in Wonderland makeups that are built up.
That's probably her favourite movie of all time. Is the original Alice in Wonderland.
And that's before foam latex, obviously, so that leap was massive in that duration of time.
I have pictures of that.
But both
in the profile
those...
I did in the latest edition of my book, Margaret talks about the Wizard, the Alice in Wonderland.
Because I remember talking to her about it and just being like, and then when I checked it all out, because I don't know if I was aware of it at the time I met her or if it was after, but I just remember looking at those things and then finding online, you can find the patents of them. Yeah. I think a guy called Jason Barnett found all the patents and put them on his group one time. And I remember just looking at them, studying them, going, oh my God. And they'd done like lifts to lift things in the cheeks and to take weight off things. And they would be tied on the top of the head to lift the weight off and so on. And that was things I seen later down.
That was substantially before Wizard of Oz too.
Right, yeah. It's only about, like, 10, 15 years before though, wasn't it? Yeah. But still a good amount of time. I remember, like, later on, like, obviously 2000, seeing Sean Harrison do a big, fat silicone makeup, huge goblin with big, huge, like, neck, so on in silicone. Everybody else was like, this was I think on the first Harry Potter when we were experimenting.
Yeah, because foam was the king.
Yeah,
foam was everything.
Nobody would do silicone, but Nick wanted to get involved in silicone. Bicentennial Man had been done. Nick's next job was Chris Columbus, so you knew how to match probably what had been given to him before. In fact, I think it might be more requirements, and he basically got Mark Coulier and Paul Spiteri to like work out silicone makeup, and this was before Plat Gel was on the market, before you could find out who did it, where to buy it. They tested platinums before. They kind of worked. Some of them had worked. They did a few on Star Wars before my time. I was new then. But then they
did it on the first Mummy. Do you remember the Imhotep one?
Yeah, well, that Imhotep one was with the same. That was their test they did for Harry Potter. Yeah. So they had to prove it worked. So they did an Imhotep makeup, and Mark and Paul did it on their own. I think we might have maybe helped on the molds. I don't know. Don't even think so. They just knocked this makeup of Imhotep out of the park. Perfect silicone makeup on their first sort of trial. They worked out a company at the time was called Principality Medical, and it was a tin-based system, but it was medical.
I think that was a groundbreaking makeup in terms of the blending of visual effects and practical makeup on the Imhotep.
Yeah, with the big fucking LED plates from the...
Yeah. It was when they were first experimenting with that stuff, really. So some of it worked, some of it didn't. And I remember, this was on The Mummy too, when they did the silicone makeup for him. And they nailed it. They got it down. And then Harry Potter, they went, right, we're going to do like... What's
the second one? Because we were in the other workshop, weren't we?
Yeah. And they were like, we're going to do like 7 goblins in silicone makeup, which was mega ambitious at the time for Nick to do. And to task his guys with, and you probably must have went, what do you think is logistically possible? How many pieces can we make? Back then, all of the to get the edges that good, we were using tin silicone for the molds as well, tin silicone for the pieces, but it was medically approved tin silicone from a medical company.
Factor 2?
No, this was called Principality, and it come like Vaseline. Cosmosil, yeah.
Is that the name of the silicone? Principality was the company.
That's right. And you had to mix, like, it was like a Vaseline substance, mix your colour with it, and then you had like a thinner, that thinned it down into like, and you had to mix it the day before because otherwise it wouldn't be mixed properly, ideally. But like Mark and Pauline suddenly got like us to like help out on their moulds, and to get the right 40 short tin, we had to do ZBrush-ons. I remember the moulds.
Do you remember we had to make foam inserts like the nose, like the goblin nose?
Foam
was
inserts.
like a foam reduction and then a silicon skin on the outside because it wasn't solid silicon.
And these were all very subtle. There would have little foam, like little insets on the cheeks as well, and things like that. And you had to we were using again, that is none of my R&D at all, nothing to do with me whatsoever. I was just the helper to make the
There's a
Paul
picture
and
of me and
Marks.
you sticking on that makeup on JDV, who's went on to become R2D2.
So they went through so many different barriers. They tried so many cat plastics, so many of these things, so many of that things. In the end, I remember it was like, what's that company? Zeltex. They used Zella, and they bought Zeltex 1 and 2 different types of Zeltex from Zella in the States, and they shipped it all over. Telesis had just come out, they shipped it all over. Massive, huge orders of that stuff so we could get by. Did 7 silicone makeups and I think 30 background goblin heads.
In foam.
And those were silicone pull and masks,
right.
And the rest of them were all, I think we might have done some foam ones, but the rest of them were the silicone makeups, which mean you got to apply one, which was like, to me, I was like, amazing. Got to apply a makeup on a Harry Potter film and a silicone makeup when it was in its test sort of phase and so on. So we did all them. Cut to what, like 10 years later, it was the last Harry Potter that Nick did. There was like 50 silicone makeups all done in one. The amount of work was crazy. 50, well, like 100 makeup artists all in one tent, sticking on 50 goblin makeups.
I've seen pictures of that.
I've
People from all over the world.
Walking into that environment with those people, it was like a who's who of the industry all in one room, pretty much.
They didn't ask.
And then, I think they had to get them from Europe and stuff like that. Yeah. So it was kind of, but there was like, you meet people you'd only met on Facebook if Facebook was out on MySpace, or you meet people, I know who you are, and so on. So that was quite interesting, that sort of leap from there to there.
Have you seen the Kevin Yeager muscle suits for Keanu Reeves and Alex Winter from the last Bill and Ted's
No,
movie?
I've not actually seen the movie either.
Oh my God. It's a silicone skin, but it's a foam latex suit with a silicone skin.
Right.
Outer skin.
Tin silicone, because it's got a cure on the...
Yeah.
Now, because what Kevin used to do, like on Chucky, he used to like get the foams, didn't he? Cook a foam in the oven, take it out of the oven, trim the foam back with scissors.
That's exactly what he did on these suits.
Wow, a whole suit done like that.
If you listen to Makeup Artist Magazine podcast, Mark Rookie talks to Kevin Yeager about this.
Wow.
And it's insane because you think, surely you just core it out. But no, he just snipped it all back.
Yeah.
Then put it back in the mould. And it's like, that's a lot of work.
Have you tried that? Have you tried it?
No. Well, we've done something similar with polyurethanes.
Right.
Where we were making a quick, core, and then you have to stipple some A and B.
I tried it. I couldn't work out what he was doing. And what I don't quite fully understand, and maybe it's because it's such a small amount of silicone you put in, but when I've tested things like that out in the past on polyfoam and filling the mould with silicone, the pressure inside of the mould just gets so much when you fill the mould up. It just slowly crushes and crushes and crushes the polyurethane inside. And then you keep pouring silicone in, thinking, well, I measured
this. Where's it going? Yeah.
I measured the silicone ratio. It said it was 200 grams. And it's like 300, 400, 500. You keep topping it up. And then when you take out the finished job, it looks like a blowfish. It's just suddenly it's like inflated out, and you're like, oh my God. And then you've got to go in there and chop a lot of the polyfoam out to get it back into place, but your silicone's all over the place. So whatever Kevin was doing with those heads, maybe it was so fine, that amount of silicone he was putting in.
It's quite amazing.
I tested it on small, just slab tests, and I could never really get them to bond or get things to work. And it was before platinums. I was trying tin.
I wonder if you had a core, like you need for doing an underskull for an animatronic head. Do the silicone first and then inject the foam.
There was a weird thing a long time ago when I first ever entered the industry. I don't know if you might have seen this. Apparently 2 guys at Image Animation used to run foams, but they would have hair in them. They would and I got a piece and I was given it. Like, here's a sample of foam latex, and I got it given to me. And it was foam latex. looked like it'd been punched with hair, but it wasn't punched. That hair was in the foam. And I was told they had a technique where they laid the hair into the mould first or something and then foamed it.
I've never heard.
And I was like, what is this like dark art? And I've never seen it since, never heard anything about it since, never know anyone that knows these guys. But I've seen the sample with my own eyes in my hand. The only thing I could think is, did they do like a hair transfer type thing where they laid like a layer of wax or something or something like soap or something into the mould first, took the masking tape off or something, then foamed it. So some technique that might have been employed. Maybe it wasn't repeatable.
Yeah,
but
I'm
every so
trying to
often
put
you
my
see
head
something.
around that, because you think that they would just embed all of the hair in the foam.
Yeah, I have no idea how it was done or who was doing it, but
No idea.
you do get a little crazy.
If anybody's listening and knows how that's done, please let us know.
That would be wonderful to know.
I guess the closest one is setting your hair, laying your hair into the cat plastic. Remember, Neil was doing that technique.
Yeah, I've done that. I did
great.
that for a chimpanzee makeup when I did a demo. And I did a sort of an homage to Dr. Pogo from the Umbrella Academy, where I had laid hair into sheets of cat plastic, and after I got the prosthetic on, I just form fitted these stretchy pieces of hair and just glued it all down, and it looked great. And it took a fraction of the time of hand laying it.
No lace to see
on the day. Yeah.
Very cool. No, it's a really neat technique.
Hand laying. I've always liked hand laying. So ever since I was first doing my really dodgy horror movies, and I managed to sort of slowly coax my mum into like thinking I wanted to take doing creatures and prosthetics as a sort of profession, or wanted to move in that direction. She took me to Forbidden Planet, and there was one in Newcastle at the time, and like me being 16 or 17 or whatever, I went, oh, my son wants to do this, can you help? And basically the guy that helped me get the books and so on was like, oh, look, there's this Tom Savini Grand Illusions and there's this Dick Smith one. I looked at the Dick Smith one and was like, oh, all the pictures in there, they're wacky, they're like children and things with googly eyes. And I looked at Tom Savini one's Texas Chainsaw Massacre and kind of 2 or whatever, and all this Friday the 13th, all gore, and so I bought both the books. I went away with both of those books that day and started studying them and looking at them. Very quick, I couldn't really get anything from the Tom Savini book for what level I was at that time. But however, in the Dick Smith one, although the pictures I didn't like, the words were right and the information was right. And there was a part of that Dick Smith monster makeup book that tells you how to make eyes, the way he did them on The Exorcist, using like vac forms, which he used a little tiny Mattel vac former. I think it's Mattel or Tomy vac former, and he used to vac form the eyes on that little tiny machine, and then he would like kind of lay a little bit of clear resin in there, and then he would put the iris, hand painted iris in there, drop it in, then he would mix up the white of he'd put red fibres in for the red blood vessels, and he'd mix up from all back painted basically, and mix up talcum powder. I remember saying J&J talcum powder for the white of the eyes, and I remember going, J&J, what's J&J talcum powder? Asked my mum. She go, oh, it'll be this Johnson & Johnson one here. I tried loads of different talcs and they all went like yellow or some wacky colour, but J&J was like eye colour. I was like, oh my god. So I was making eyes like how Dick Smith was making them, but like probably about 10% of the quality.
Can't get that stuff anymore. It's all cornstarch
I know,
now.
I've heard. So I was like, once I'd realised them eyes worked, I was like, what other information is in this book that I'm like the cover doesn't show. So I started really studying that book, and I don't even know if I really went back to the Tom Savini book, because it was more the Tom Savini book.
The Savini stuff's more special effects.
It was like magic tricks. It was like, this is how you perform an illusion, which is what the book says on the cover. Whereas the Dick Smith book was like, this is how you can make stuff and cobble it together with some stuff from the hardware shop. I used to just I remember, like I say, taking those little balls of clay from the art class and taking them back. That was my clay supply. I never, even when I had plaster in it, I'd meticulously go through and pick all the plaster out and keep that like gold, that clay, because I didn't realise you could buy a bag for £6. I thought it was like gold, and I didn't know where to buy it. There was no pottery places where I lived. Never found one anywhere in the area. My parents weren't the sort of people to go, oh, hop in the car and we'll drive around and find a one. I had to do everything by myself on a bus, or a metro system we had, fortunate of having in Newcastle. And I remember like one day going to the model shop, buying little bags of plaster for like £2 a bag, and you got like a bag that felt like air of plaster, and it would last 5 seconds. And I remember just thinking, I'm just going to try getting plaster somewhere else. And I think Dick Smith or one of the books had said about buying industrial plaster, and it was all about ultracal, something that we don't have here in England. And I think I just ended up going to a building yard on the Met Road, about 8 miles from my house, walking in, looking at plasters, and it might have been Cristacal, which we use often now, or Herculate 2 or something. I think I just picked whatever plaster sounded similar to Ultracal, so it might have been Cristacal. 25 kilogram bag, and I was like a little kid of 17, lugged it on my shoulder, went to the counter, £10 a bag or something. I was like, oh my God, I've got like
all this.
A giant, huge bag of plaster that'll last for my entire life. Like, for the same price as like kind of 5 bags of the £2 stuff, which you get nothing. And I looked at it and I walked all the way to the metro station with that, put it on the train. I don't know how I walked that. I could struggle carrying those bags now. Isn't it dull? So I took that home. I had plaster, and I was like, right, latex. Latex you could only buy from little art shops and little tiny little tubs for like extortionate amount of money. Copytex just didn't quite cut it. Although I did do scars and things with Copytex. I ended up going to a B&Q, and on their shelf they had carpet latex, and I was like, carpet latex? I'll give that a shot. £3.25 a bottle. Took it to the counter. Well, no, we're not selling it to you. It's an adhesive. We can't sell glue to children. And I'm like, oh my God, because I was under 18. I didn't have ID.
Ammonia addiction is a very big thing.
And I was like, kind of latex isn't like a bad. And I sort of fought my corner. I think I'm not sure if they let me get it, but I might have had to go back.
That's like not selling you spoons because knives can kill people.
Yeah, exactly. So
it's a utensil.
Literally everything I did at that point was that one bag of plaster, and also I did find a bag of plaster in my dad's garage, and I didn't know what it was. It was grey, so I think it was probably cement. And I did a life cast of my torso, lying down with a bucket next to me, pouring plaster on my torso.
Did a cast of your own chest?
Yeah, and I used vegetable oil. I put vegetable oil on my chest, and I poured it all on there, thinking I'm like, I'm 17. I don't have any hairs on my chest. I'm a little kid, and I didn't have any hairs. I didn't realise all those microfine hairs that you do have.
How long did it take to get it off?
Yeah, man, that broke into about 3 or 4 bits getting it off. And I was so precious about keeping it, not breaking. And ultimately, when I did get it off in 3 or 4 pieces and somehow patch it together, I might as well have just cast a piece of flooring outside. I had no form to my body. I was just flat. I didn't have a 6-pack or anything. It's like just a flat slab of cement. I did use it. I used it for my horror film I first did. I cast latexes out of it. Like food colouring for all the blood, like say carpet latex, all these sort of things. And that is like my first foray in creature effects.
And I'm trying to think, the film we worked on, was it the Avengers? Not the Marvel one, but the one with the giant bees. As in Ralph Feinnes and
Uma Thurman, Sean Connery.
And Sean Connery, and these giant bees that Eddie Izzard was controlling. And we did night shifts, sanding them and fiberglass in the body parts.
I remember like this the weird thing with that.
I don't think I've ever seen this one.
Yeah, you might want to keep it that way. I watched it again. I was one of the people that come out of the cinema going, I quite enjoyed that, and everyone else went, that is complete. And I was like, I didn't get it, but the thing is, it was exciting. It was the first movie I worked on, and I went to, and it had quite a big input in it. And in fact, one of the molds I made for those wasps was the head. And the head was quite a complicated mould, the way the eye inserts were to get into laminated. And ended up being a 4-piece case, silicon case mould. It was the first case mould I ever made. It was probably one of the better ones I ever made.
So I remember you used to keep a list of notes of your gel coat mixes and your resin mixes for laminating, and you'd take notes of temperature. And
do you want me to go and grab them now? I can grab them in a second.
We can get them when we leave out of here.
Yeah, we're going to get a couple of photos of those.
Yeah, we'd love to.
Those kinds of things.
Because we were talking a little bit about Claire Green.
Yeah, because she had
in
a
her
notebook.
notebooks.
Yeah.
Yeah, I admire anybody who's a note taker. Rob's a note taker, obviously, Rob Freitas.
Yeah.
And it's and we talk about that quite often. I personally, not like my memory's bad. If I'm on ZBrush and I do, like I say, I was doing like a task off one of the YouTube demos, I'd do that task and I'd take notes, and my notes would be like 4 pieces of paper. A4 bits of paper, drafted up, all the notes from that video. The next day I would look at the notes and I'd go, I don't need all those notes. It's now sinking in a bit. So I'd refine the notes. It'd be 2 sheets of A4 paper. I'd do the same demo again the next night. Suddenly I'd have it down like for a few paragraphs worth of information. And that's how I work. Like I work with fiberglassing. I'd write down everything, write down all the ratios, all the different mixes, everything, and then refine it, and then keep coming back to it.
But the act of writing it down is a big part of it.
Yeah.
The fact you're able to reduce it is because you've committed it to memory. But
then it's in long-term memory, and you'll never forget.
Like you like the reason. One of the reasons I said to you, should I go and get that book now? Is
well, go on then.
That's my traditional stuff, which I used to do when I was doing a lot more practical effects, which I still do. I still do the practical stuff, but once I moved on to digital, it was all started again. I was like, oh my god!
Do you remember we were working for someone? We won't go into that. But you were trying to do like really detailed notes of how the molds were being made for this body that was floating. Do you remember that? And he was kind of pissed off at you for making detailed notes and drawings of how he did it. He couldn't understand why you would bother logging all this. You're like, yeah, but when you worked on like, you know,
that person you're talking about,
yes.
It's like he's like more of a fine artist, should I say, in his technique of how he approaches the work. And he approaches the work and like he's one of the best in the game, right? He's an incredible artist. That's where he comes from, and I think a lot of people are like that in the industry. A lot of people are like artists. But I'm never really been. I'm an artist, but it's kind of like it's very different. When it comes to the stuff I do at work, I'm more of a technical guy.
Yeah.
I'm more into the technicalities of things, and
they're like chefs. I don't need a recipe book.
Yeah. Like, they just cook the best food ever.
But that doesn't mean the recipe books are bad.
I know what ingredients will taste like when they're mixed,
and they will just put a handful of that in this and come out with the best meal ever. Whereas I have to go 100 grams of that, 150 grams of that, so on. And the next time I make it, if I've forgotten all those measurements, it ain't going to taste right. It ain't going to taste as good as they're doing it. It's so hence I have to have those notes. So this is like a little notebook here of like my first sort of ZBrushy sort of stuff. Being very scrappy, lots of different ideas. These are just notes watching movies off YouTube, and then writing down notes to then try to take into reality when I'd get home. So I'd be slowly.
This is kind of like what Claire was doing.
So I would do these in my breaks at work and at lunch times. And on one side, and this is all stuff off the internet, this is not my work, this is watching videos, taking notes. So it'd be doing notes after notes after notes, and just keep going and keep going and keep going and keep going. And then it'd be full of like some screenshots, some bits. I'd watch a video and go, oh, that bit was really good, how it changed that to that. Mm-hmm. And I would be like kind of like just taking shots, so I'd remember them. So anyway, I would be doing lots of notes, lots of post-it notes, etc. If I went back to this book now and looked at it, probably understand maybe 10% of it. It's kind of a lot of it is that for the moment of when I was learning it, and the chances are I might only understand 10% of it, but I know it all. Like I just mightn't understand my notes because my notes are very
the actual thing you're trying to achieve. You could do it.
Yeah. And then from that, then I would. When I get downtime later down the line, then I would refine it, and then I would be putting all my shortcuts in, doing guides, just doing a ZBrush like key things, how to clean up hair off a scan, so on. Just all these little bits that you might do once, and then you might.
So
do
when's your course
years.
coming out?
Yeah, right. No, there's too many good people out there already doing it. So it's so I'd be doing all these little notes and stuff that I just never wanted to forget. And before I started doing digital moulding professionally, as part of my job, obviously you've got to learn it in your own private time first, so you can then show it to bosses and show it to people and go, we could do this thing. Other people were doing it. There was a guy called Nat Reynolds. Not sure if you've heard of him. He's the first guy I really seen pushing all this stuff.
Yeah.
And me and Rob Freitas and probably other people I know were helping him make. He was doing brush-on moulds. He was doing really basic moulds ages ago from his garden shed. Him and his wife. He had this operation running, incredible, but limited because he was doing brush-ons. He was like me when I was younger, dipping things in latex and working stuff out. I was mixing plaster with latex to see what I'd get. He was still doing that sort of type stuff, seeing what you could get, and he didn't know what a case mould was. He hadn't really seen them, and when he did see them, it was people like me and Rob Freitas doing them, and Carl Lyon and so on. He's seen all these like people doing case moulds who've been doing it for years and have got it down to a fine art. And like, as you know, it's like when people put holiday snaps on the internet, they're all happy in a blue background that looks amazing. They're not showing the holiday shot of it raining and thundering and them being stuck inside the hotel room. It's like, and that's what our moulds are like a lot of the time. A lot of the moulds aren't perfect. They're sometimes ropey as hell. But the ones you see on the internet are going to be the good ones. So it's kind of like this guy's seeing all of that and probably daunted by it. And I know me and Rob and a few of us were like, nah, you've got to start doing it. And we started just helping him out. My brother as well, helping this guy, like, trying to move. We're basically trying to bully him into doing them like case molds. Going, go on, do it. And eventually he started doing them. Like, just as good as us. He was doing these remarkable, amazing case molds. And he's like, why have I not done this earlier? Next thing I go on the internet one day, I click on Facebook or whatever. There's a full 3D printed back cowl with a 3D printed case mold on it, cleaned up, all like there's normal sprays done in this garden shed, all cleaned up, mold bolted together, poured it with silicone, casting urethane cowls out of it, like way beyond what we were doing at the time, way beyond. And we were like, looking at it, I am anyway, saving screenshots for stuff, and he was just throwing them out there like throwaway. It was like it was nothing to him. And I'm like, man, do you know how good that stuff is? Do you know how employable you are with them skills? And that was a real kick up the ass. I was like, man, he's gone from doing brush on moulds a couple of years earlier, and we trying to get him to do industry standard stuff, to him just surpassing us and going right over our heads. And I was just like, man, that guy's like a genius, and he is. Unfortunately, he shut down his business eventually. He's moved out of it. He doesn't do it anymore. I tried to coax him into doing it, and he wasn't really. He just wanted to shut down the operation and call it a day, which is a real sad shame because he's so good. And he ended up selling me a lot of his machines. Those two machines, 3D printing machines out there. He sold me them for like next to nothing. He just was really kind to me, I think, because we were kind to him learning originally. I think he was a bit like, very good guy. So basically, I was just doing notes, how to make moulds and ZBrush, all these sort of things. Same deal as before. How to do. There was a mould I did for Tristan. I was trying to work out Tristan for Slouse, and this was before I knew what flip normals were, and before I knew that a single layer of geometry in a computer has a front and a back, and the two don't go together. So I was extracting things and then cutting away half of the back of one and half of the front of another and trying to bond them together by bridging a gap with ZModeler, by using the bridge tools and filling gaps and filling holes, and it wouldn't work because it's one's a negative normal and one's a positive one, and it's trying to flip the join between the two. Yeah. So this was all my notes trying to work out like how to resolve that problem, and I couldn't work it out. I did work out a workaround. Eventually you do, but I maybe spent 2 days trying to work that out until I knew what a normal was, and like terminologies and 3D packages. Yeah. Like I say, I've had a huge gap. I only started 5 years ago learning a package again. And I was amazed by ZBrush. I was just like blown away by it. I think I was probably one of the only people I've met so far who's just got it and just went like, that's the best thing I've ever seen in my life. I was just like, I'm amazed by it. And everyone else I would talk to would be saying to me, it's made by a madman. That package is made by a madman. It just doesn't work.
Interface is just, yeah.
They were all from CAD backgrounds, a lot of them.
Oh, God, yeah.
And they're like, they just, everything is backwards, everything is in the wrong side, everything's in the wrong place, and it'd be going, ZBrush is crazy, it's made by a madman. And I'm like, man, I've jumped from Sculpt 4D on an Amiga in 1993, suddenly 20 odd years later jumping to ZBrush.
Yeah.
to me, I was like, oh my God, it was like I'd just gone in Doc Brown's time machine and landed in 2025.
That 20 years with a white suit in between, though, is quite useful.
Yeah, it is. The wearing a white suit and doing all the moulding is 90% of that technical mould making work. It's 10% is the computer. It's all that history of previous experience and knowing how undercuts work, collapsible cores, locking, how silicon runners want their things, how just people want it, how the mold shop wants it for backing up, how making their life easier, so on. But it took me a long time to work out the vocabulary in ZBrush or any package to work, and I'd watch videos and they'd say things, and then I'd have to spend about 2 hours trying to work out what that was, what they were talking about.
It's normals and vertices and triangles versus quads and blah blah blah.
It's another language. You're learning a new language. So that was the biggest sort of pitfall I had when I started learning it. I didn't know the language, so it's like I knew I'd use the package and I knew I'd use what I was doing. I was slowly learning that, but when I would watch a video and it would say a wording, to find the information on what that wording was, it's like there's obvious ones like booleans and things like that, that come up, and you'll find a million videos on that.
Unfortunately, the terminology is the same across all of the software.
Right. That's my problem as well, because the terminology when I was using Sculpt 4D on an Amiga back in 1993 was just like using Word. You had a couple of menus at the top.
Yeah.
It was like tech drawing.
I think that's where a lot of the sculptors have a hard time with ZBrush if they move into ZBrush at first. But what ZBrush will do, because it's a program, it puts numbers as a value of something. Because you want to increase the severity of something, it does it numerically, and you slider it up, and it will give names to things that you want. Like if I'm sculpting and I press a bit further with my thumb, I don't give that a name, and I certainly don't calibrate like the least amount of pressure and the most amount of pressure my thumb is, and then I assess, is this a 37% or a 39% pressure? You don't do that. But with ZBrush, you do have that. Yeah. But you also have the pressure sensitivity of a pen tip on a tablet. So there's a little bit of natural, but I think that's what it is. It's quantifying things with a name and a number, which you don't do when you sculpt manually. And I think it throws a lot of people. And I have a theory that mold makers will actually find ZBrush not easier, but they can put up with it because we're so used to being dictated to by the materials and the gel coat, the curing times, the fact I want to get out of here, so I'm going to make sure I do it by 5 so I can green trim it at 7.
You have the factors of, if you're working with Ultracal, there is a formula on the bag of how much water to how much powder is the perfect mixture. But you work with this stuff enough, it becomes a feel. And sometimes for your detail coat, you want it to be runnier than you do for your outer layer that you're going to be smoothing out. The outside. It's the same kind of thing.
You develop a feel for it.
There's a feel for it, but it's still,
But if you're used to working in that field,
it's like I want it to be like a Wendy's frosty milkshake as opposed to McDonald's chocolate milkshake. It's it needs to stay where I put it when
pissier or rounder as the plaster is
when I'm brushing off. Yeah, but there's their terminology. There's what it's supposed to feel like. How it's supposed to move when you're putting it on the sculpture.
You just make it what it needs to be.
Yeah.
But that's the thing, and I think mold makers are so used to being dictated to by material processes in a way that sculptors are not. Sculptors are always kind of dealing with the same problems. With mold making, what I'm saying is, because a mold maker gets told by materials and temperatures, you have to conform and bend yourself to it. Like we did with the union-y stuff. You remember we would fiberglass things, they would have a break at 11 or whatever, so they'd stop, have their break, and then put the gel coat on and they'd sit around for half an hour. Whereas it'd be like, well, let's just work another 5 minutes, get the gel coat on, and then that can be going while we're off having our tea. When we come back, the gel coat's ready. Yeah. And that way, the mould gets finished by the end of the day instead of only half a mould, because there's a tipping point with, well, if you're not going to gel coat it now, you won't get it glassed in time because we want to green trim it. So it's knowing those kinds of things. And I do honestly think that mould makers that are used to being told what to do by materials actually have an easier time, or they're already conditioned to being told off like a little bitch by something else anyway. So this time it's just ZBrush that does it. Do you know what I mean? So you're kind of all right with it. Whereas if you've always been in control of the clay, the thought that now I've got to learn all this new shit. And Simon Webber put it down really well. He said a lot of sculptors are they're unwilling to feel uncomfortable after being so comfortable for a long time.
Right.
They don't want to go through that.
Well, like all the sculptors
rebirth.
I've just been working at over the first few years, initially there was some sort of pushback from some. A lot of the others were really operate. It was a huge random mix, actually.
I think it's changing now. Maybe 10 years ago.
Well,
it was
this
there
is
was
just
a
in
lot
the last
of
couple of years.
profanity when we were figuring it out.
Well, just
Yes.
just even the last few years, some people just love. Well, not just some people, myself included. And I'm sure both you guys would be exactly the same. There's nothing better than grabbing a bag of wet clay and sculpting up something in wet clay. No matter how good about a sculptor you are, wet clay is just beautiful to work
Oh
with.
yeah, because
And
you
then,
can push it around so easily.
But what I found was I loved wet clay, and I kind of like Sculpey. But I spent my entire career pretty much where everybody was like plastiline. It's plastiline. You've got to do everything in plastiline, moulding it in plastiline, sculpting it in plastiline. Everything was plastiline at one point. And I hate plastiline. Like I didn't used to. I used to love it because I used to like it was all I knew, and I was like I don't have to wrap it up and so on. But how slow it is compared to clay, it's not intuitive enough to like blast something out and to quickly get it wet again, or to get it leather hard or hair dryer it. And it's just a bit more sort of fun. Clay somehow fun. And I found some sculptors found that quite tricky. They'd be like kind of like, I prefer just doing that. It makes more sense. And some stuff it does. Some stuff it doesn't. But obviously in your infancy as well of learning ZBrush, it kind of it can feel like it's slowing you down rather than speeding you up. You learn that over time. Like
I
anything.
think one of the biggest hurdles Stuart and I overcame, because we were figuring it out at the same time. A lot of profanity in the learning process.
Mm-hmm.
But once Maddie Spencer said, you look at the brush menu when you open it up, and it's like, holy shit, there's like a gajillion brushes. And you mentioned it. There's maybe a handful of brushes you will need to do anything.
And there's certain things
ZBrush.
like there's certain things in ZBrush where, like, say smoothing down a life cast that's got hair, you can just remesh it, have so many subdivisions, go back to subdivision 1, smooth the back of the head down, work up your subdivisions. It's like having the best sandpaper in the world that just cuts through stuff so quick, and you can just reformulate shapes really fast. That would take hours in real life, hours and hours, and do it really quick. But then you might have a sort of wrinkle on an eye, an eyelid or something like that. Would take you 5 seconds with a little loop tool and do it by hand in real life, and you would go, that's exactly how I want that little crease. And then ZBrush, you just kind of mightn't be able to get it as easy.
You might accidentally distort it without meaning to.
Yeah. There's kind of like, so there's a bit of, and then obviously that'll come with time and you will suss that out. But I can understand the frustration completely. And yeah, again, one thing I find with which I'll go back into in this notebook in a moment. A lot of sculptors and a lot of people in my findings, because I deal with a lot of people sculptors on a daily basis now whenever I'm working doing 3D printed molds and designing the molds in ZBrush, is you get to learn the ins and outs of every different sculptor and all the different styles and how they operate. And some are just clean. You'll get, like, I'm not going to mention names of anybody or anything like that, but some sculpts you get through, they're just clean as a whistle. I'll look over the whole mesh, I'll study it, can't find a fault. I might find the odd little thing here or there, but who doesn't do that? And you get other ones that come through, and the sculpt looks amazing. All the concepts are approved. They're shown on, they're printed on paper. They get approval. They come through to me, and I get them. And then you get them, and you go, oh my god! And the whole geometry and the makeup of the model is, some of it's single-sided, some of it's clashed together models, some of it's IMM tools, some of it's downloaded files somebody else has used that are just stuck together, quickly cobbled together. There is no real, they're not solid entities, a lot of the pieces. And sometimes you'll get like things where somebody say, one example of a thing that happened once where somebody had pulled the back of the mesh in through the front of the neck and then smoothed it down and then textured it. So basically the negative normal of the back was coming through the front 50-50, invisible to see, textured it, handed it over to me to mould. And then when I went to start moulding it, booleans wouldn't work, nothing would work. It's like the whole package was just disabled.
Error.
And you were like, what's going on with this mesh? And then you study it. And some sculptors work with polygroups, some don't. And the people who work with polygroups, it's a joy because you can just isolate a polygroup, solve the problem. If something's got a different polygroup on a base, and it's pulled through to the front in that way, you can just isolate the polygroup, pull it back down, done. People who don't work with polygroups or erase their polygroups at the very end of the process, you can't modify that afterwards. You have to then make a new mesh, do all your subdivisions again, reproject it, go in meticulous. You have to spend hours fixing that before you can then start the Boolean processes to make a mold, which moulding relies heavily on Booleans, extraction, Z-modelers, all the things that don't like a bad mesh. So you get very good at working out which sculptors are the clean ones and which ones are a bit messy, and you can't tell. And the two of the big things, I say this for the podcast, two of the big things that you get through right at the very end when most sculptors have sculpted something, they'll use the inflate tool. Are you aware of the inflate tool?
Mm-hmm.
So they'll use the inflate tool and then they'll up the contrast. Both of those things, I think it's in the deformation menu on the right hand side, both of those things, like ZBrush doesn't have clash detection in the same, like when you're just traditionally sculpting in it. It probably does if you put something on, maybe the gravity or something like that. I don't know. I haven't really delved into that. But the moment you inflate a model, it'll inflate into itself. It's difficult to describe, to verbalize it, but it'll go into itself. And then when you then do the contrast, it'll then go into itself more. And then if you say then, like, what's to say to put that inside of a giant cube and Boolean it out, ZBrush doesn't know what it's looking at. It's got some
15 million polygons.
Yeah, polygons are clashing into each other. They're going through each other. It's like basically putting your hand through a brick wall.
Yes.
You kind of like can't do that in real life.
Yes.
And it's the same in ZBrush. You can't pull the sculpt through itself. But all on the texture, all on the detail, all on the fat folds of a neck, everywhere, every cheekbone, every nostril, everything.
Because sculpturally, it's so quick and easy. It looks great.
It looks amazing.
What it does to the geometry is the problem.
Yeah.
And then you object to that being an issue because that doesn't happen with clay.
Yeah.
And I had this.
Yeah.
And you'll get angry at it. It's like, why would you make it do that?
Yeah.
But it's just a side effect of what
Like
magical thing you've got.
if ZBrush had a little technique for when you used that inflate tool and the contrast tool, that would have a clash detection, so it couldn't go into itself. My life would be so much easier, because a lot of the time, if I ever get a model that's come through and they've used the inflate and the contrast tool right at the end, normally there's things to do right close to the end of the job. It depends how much they've done it, and if they've done it too much. And most people do it because you want to get the folds looking like right. You want to get the fatty folds and the
That's
meatiness of
something
it.
that somebody should probably, let Maxon know that this would be something really useful for a great many people who are using it for this purpose to have.
And the thing is, you can't
collision detection or clash detection,
and you can't even see it in reality. It's only when you inspect the mesh. So I get asked.
To all intents and purposes, it's not there.
I get asked quite often. I get phone calls, people ringing me up saying, "Can you mold this mold of this little kind of monkey or whatever? Could you make that mold for me?" I know I can make the mold. It'd be easy. The mold's the easy bit. I can make that mold, no problem. The monkey. What petrifies me is who sculpted it, how it was sculpted, how many pieces it in. Is it broken down properly? Have they thought about the eyes? Have they put a mouth interior into it? Have they done a return on the lips?
Which
Have
are
they
all
got the
sculptural
eyes set up
issues.
right?
Exactly like you said about, if someone was to cut up a makeup, you want to make sure you got your cores ready.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing. It's sculpting, but now it's being processed into individual things and separate molds. Like you've got your, the scans you've done. You've added on these columns on the next so that they can fit inside the molding. So you've got to make allowances for these things outside of just the shape of the sculpture.
I had one model come through to me. It took me maybe 2 days to repair all the models before I could even start making the mold. It took me half a day, maybe a day to do all the molds. So if somebody rings you up and goes, "Oh, could you do a 3D mold for me?" You don't know whether it's going to take you half a day, 1 day, or 3 days, unless you inspect the model. So it's kind of like, it's almost you need somebody to go, "Well, send me the model, I'll inspect it, and I'll get back to you like half an hour later."
I get phone calls and it's like, "Can you do a werewolf mask?" Yes.
Can you need more detail than that?
What else? Can you tell me about it?
And this is the thing. The people who ask me to make the mold sometimes are really savvy in the creature industry. They're really good. They're good guys. They're not bad guys. They're just unaware of the obstacles in place regarding a 3D model and who's sculpting it. Again, there's one particularly ZBrush artist out there that I know and I've worked with a number of times. If they were to say, this one artist did that sculpt, how long will it take you to mold it? I'll say, oh yeah, it'll be done by the end of the day. Because I know his stuff is so slick and so tight. He, as far as I'm aware, he's watched all the same videos I've watched. I'm positive of it. I get his files through. I study everybody's work. I study everybody's work that lands on my desk. And I watch the improvement as well. They all improve. They all obviously get better. Everybody does. And some people who were rough at the start, I get the file and go, I can't find an error on that. They've got there. They've watched more videos or they've learned more stuff. And one thing I find, some people who learn ZBrush really early, some of the real innovative people in the industry, when ZBrush was tough, when there was no YouTube, those guys are sometimes a little bit harder. Their meshes are like messier because they've self-taught. Yeah. They've had the hardest job out of all of us. So I just go on YouTube and I watch videos, and I'm like I'm taught by the best teachers on YouTube. Whereas those guys had to teach themselves, and I can't imagine how they even did that with ZBrush. I remember first getting ZBrush. I might have got a copy of you, or you might have showed me it years and years and years ago, a long time ago. I brought it up and I did the same as everyone else. Like, what the hell is this? Shut it down after a day or two. Never went back to it. Took me about 10 years to go back to it. I did that a long time ago. Those guys were doing that. And they learned it and they worked it out. But I think because they got so good so early, self-taught, they don't go back and watch videos of like how ZBrush has evolved.
Yeah, they're comfortable with what they know. And they work within what they know.
Yeah.
Whereas you're looking to expand what you know.
Like, whereas if they did the technicality things that I'm doing so much, and like more the molds and different things like that, they would hit the same obstacles I hit. Then they would have problems to solve.
Well, if they went to take that model where everything's kind of going in and out of itself and tried to print it, the printer would...
Well, a lot of times the printer does print it. That's the thing. A lot of the times...
So there's no holes.
Well, it's a matter of water, what they call watertight.
Yeah. A lot of the times it still works. You take it in the prusa. I've done that. I've took bad models in the prusa slicer. I've took bad models in the mesh mixer. And then you just press fix it. And it fixes it. But it doesn't mean that you can then pull it in ZBrush and then make the mold of it still. It'll still be garbage when you take it back into ZBrush. But it will print. And you're like, oh, okay, that's what... So that's why they're never hitting that problem. So even the people who are doing their own models and own ZBrush sculpts and printing it themselves, they're not really hitting the problem. Every so often I get a sculpt that will come through to either me or there's a guy I work with at work called Scott Riley, who's an incredible, talented 3D guy as well. And me and him work together as a really good team, I believe. And sometimes I've seen him put a file up or he's printed something and it's like done a weird line in the middle of the print where there's been some glitch or problem. I've not seen that myself because I've never printed any of my own stuff that's had that. And he's went, it's where there was a hole or a gap or some missing data and it's corrupted it. So he's then fixed it, put it back in, printed again, no problems. So you kind of like, and I think a lot of people who print, that's probably they probably only, those things only happen every so often. They're printing stuff all the time and they're coming out wonderful. Why do they need to change it? Why do they need to change their inflate or their contrast? There's no reason to, because they fixed it in the slicing software and printed it. It's just if you want to start doing stuff within ZBrush with that file, like booleans, molds, different things, it becomes an issue. And at first, when I first started doing 3D printed molds, designing them in ZBrush, I'd get frustrated. I'd be like taking things back to the model maker, the sculptors, and going, could you sort this out? I can't mold this. This is corrupt. The file's corrupt. Look at that. And I would show them where the problems were. So they were aware. Some of them were aware of that problem. And basically they would look at it and they would fix it and give it back to me, usually super quick. They were very efficient and very, really good at all that stuff. Obviously, once they knew where the thing was and what problem I was having. And I used to it was happening over and over and it was keep happening. Eventually I just thought, like somebody mentioned it, went, wow, is that how long you're spending fixing some of these models? And rather than actually doing the job like of making the mold. And I was like, yeah. And they were like, well, really, we should get somebody else in that just fixes all the models. Yeah. And I was like, wow.
Or you sculpting right.
How about sculpting it right?
It's not that they're sculpting them wrong. That's the thing. It's just like everybody's different and everybody's got a different way. They sculpt what they know and what they believe works. And there's no malicious nature to it or anything like that. So And like I say, when you point it out, they're like kind of, oh, right, okay. And they do evolve and do get a bit better. Some people just don't because they don't think they need to. But eventually, the more and more stuff that landed on my table like that, you get good at fixing stuff. You get good at remeshing stuff. You get good at reprojecting stuff.
But it's enough of a thing. It should be a separate job, really.
Well, that's what we thought initially, and then eventually I just thought, suck it up, and it becomes part of my job. It's like, and the workflow of how I have been working at a lot of the companies and the speed of stuff coming through from the designers, you could normally accommodate it. So I was kind of like, well, rather than whine about it, that I can be very good at. I would be like kind of, I'll just get on with it. I'll just do it. Nobody wants to hear the problem. They just want to have the resolve. So I would be like, oh, I'll resolve the problem and I'll just mould it. And then nobody was knocking on my door saying, why haven't you got that thing finished? Normally you do a mould in half a day to a day or whatever. Why did you spend 2 days? Nobody ever complained about the speed I was running stuff. I had no pressure on me. Sometimes I would be asked to do a lot of stuff in a short period of time and I'd do it. And other times you might get one of those instances that you can't, but I never had one person ever say, why haven't you done that yet? Why haven't you got that done yet? So therefore, it put me at a calm, it put me at ease, and I thought, I'm not going to get blamed for how long this has took. And I don't then have to then throw somebody under a bus, so to speak, and say, oh, it's because the model was this or that. It's like, I just dealt with the problem, and it's, you got it done. And I just thought that's part of my job. But like I say, it's kind of like, it's a bit tricky when you, that's fine if you're at one company and you're doing that consistently at that company, but it's tricky if you get offered somebody on a Friday. I've had calls on a Friday night, or Friday afternoon, can you get a mould made for me? I need it for Monday morning so we can get it printed, or printed at the weekend.
Bangs my weekend gone. And
I'm thinking, well, I'm sort of slightly willing to do that. I'm not really that keen on working my weekends. I prefer spending it with my family. But if I knew which sculptor did it, and I knew that sculptor was solid, I could probably have it done on the Friday night and have it back to them for the Saturday if they need to, or at least by the Sunday they'd have it, so they can print it on the Sunday, have it by the Monday or whatever. So I could probably sit that, but like I say, I'm so like sort of like concerned the model might need a significant amount of cleanup again, which sometimes if that inflate tool and that contrast tool has been used a bit too heavy, sometimes it's a case of having to work out what textures they've used and retexturing areas and remodeling stuff, but invisibly, so they don't know you've done it, which is obviously quite an important thing. So then you can almost match to match on the screen and go, yeah. So you're fixing stuff. That's not what I want to be doing at the weekend. I don't want to be fixing a sculpt to make it possible to achieve the mold. It's like I say, if you're at a company full time running, you can do that. But the weekend, you might find I might be starting work back again on the Monday for another company, and if I've not finished that file in time, I'm suddenly got 2 jobs on overlapping, and I have to turn around to one of them and say I can't work for you because of this obstacle. And I just thought eventually it's kind of unprofessional for me to try to, so to speak, moonlight at a weekend or an evening to try to fit somebody's job in. In that way, which is, it makes it a bit tricky, which in real moulding it's the same. When you're doing a real mould, you get some sculptors like Julian Murray, I'll use as one example. Julian Murray, Graham High, they'll deliver your sculpt to you, and when you open the bag, that sculpt is like pretty much leather hard. It's the perfect, the water, the moisture has gone equally throughout that clay. It's not all wet under the chin, it's not wet underneath the ears or under the armpits, it's not soaking, it's not dripping, it's not soaking. Other times you get a sculpt from somebody and it's like they've finished the sculpt, it's been leather hard, it's been great, and then just before they give you it, they spend 2 hours spritzing it with spritzers, sponges, covering it in water, putting a bag over it. Might as well just stick it in the sea and then give you it and go, here you go, could you mould that? And you have to spend half a day drying it out.
Moisture sensitive resins. So they've got horns, they've wrapped the horns up with wet tissue, but everything else has been allowed to dry out. And then, it's those considerations.
So you have to spend half a day drying out areas of sculpt, getting hairdryer under the chin, then you've got to let the water move again. And then you've got to then dry out under the chin again, and then start getting cracks on things, because normally that progress, like what Julian Murray and Graham High would do, they're doing it over the period of the sculpt. So they're sculpting for 5 days, a horse or something like that. By day 5, they've not constantly drenched it in water where the whole bottom is like a bag of water. It's kind of like it's all equalised, the water throughout the whole sculpt, and they'll put a couple of bits of water in there overnight on sponges to keep the moisture in there, and so on. So when like say Julian Murray sometimes asks me, could I mould something for him? I know when that mould lands on my lap, I can start silver spraying it within 5 minutes, and I can start my mould.
And you know it's on a stable armature. You know it's going to be on a proper base. You know it's not going to tip over because it's top heavy and all that. It's
all those little things. So it's exactly the same as digital. And then so when you get a sculpt, if somebody says, can you mould something at the weekend? And I know it's by certain sculptors, and I know I can fit it in over a weekend if I
disciplined approach.
But if it's from a random sculptor I've never met before, I'm thinking, am I going to have to spend half a day drying it out and then the rest of the mould process filling in cracks and trying to hide where it's shrinking because I've had to dry it out? And that's really difficult. It's really difficult to work that out unless you're already in the dance with that other artist. And it's the same with ZBrush. It's exactly the same thing. It's kind of like if you both dancing together, then you're all right. But if you've got somebody that's unaware of your processes that you've got to do, like with all the bowlines and all of the cuts and all the knife tools and all the things that are going to crash in ZBrush.
You're trying to waltz and they're head banging and it's not working.
And it's nobody's fault. None of these things are anyone's fault. Like the guy that sculpted that's handing me over a dripping wet clay sculpt doesn't understand what fiberglass probably is. He has no idea, like, by handing me something that's like a bag of water, it's going to be difficult to mould. It's
that's also a good point, because we talk about this in classroom settings, that it may not be something, the mold making may not be something you want to pursue. You just want to sculpt. The more you know about all of the processes from design to set, the better it's the production process is going to be. That they're not going to hand you a sculpture that is not ready to be molded if they understand what the mold maker needs.
Exactly, yeah. And like and doing all those steps, like when I started in the industry, I thought you had to do it all. I thought you had to do the whole thing. All the books, the Tom Savini book, the Dick Smith book, led me to think, and everything I'd watched on TV led me to think you have to do everything.
On small independent productions, that is the way it is,
And it's like, so that's...
You have to wear all of the hats.
I remember talking to David White when I first started for him, and talking about that, and I said, "Oh, is that unusual?" He went, yeah. He went, "It's rare as rocking horse." I'll not say the last word, but he just went, "It's so rare to get people that can do the whole thing." And then basically I'd be working for him for a few months or whatever, and then one day he'd ask me to punch some eyebrows, and I'd be like, "I don't know how to punch eyebrows. I've never done hair work in my life." Like I had laid hair, like and did basic stuff, but I hadn't done hair punching. And then he'd be like, "Oh, why?" And he'd get frustrated at me because I hadn't done hair punching, and he'd be like, "One of the first things you should have learned is hair punching." It's like there's a path to this. And I was like, oh my God, like one thing I don't know out of like all of those other areas. I think I've learned
quite a lot. Damn it, Jim! I'm a mold maker, not a hair puncher.
But it's kind of like I could life cast, I could mold, I could sculpt to some degree, I could paint to some degree, I could do a little bit of each thing, not that well in every area, but I understood it. I could apply a makeup, again, not like the people do now, but I could apply a makeup to get by then, and so on. So I knew enough, like you say, to know what not to stitch up the next person in the queue with, so to speak. And like the industry just in England, like in America, like it seemed to be like mega shops. It was like Stan Winston's, Rick Baker's, ADI, all these mega shops, and everybody would call them the mega shops, I think, was the sort of word I'd hear banded around a lot, or a name similar to that. Whereas in England, most of the shops were like tiny. They were very small shops with like 8 people maybe in them. When I first started, it was like 6 to 8 people. Sometimes it would just be at David White, so it would be 3-4 of us, and everybody would multitask, doing a bit of everything, and everybody had to. And you'd start off doing the life casting and the gluing on the makeup. It's just otherwise you had to let you go and get somebody else in. It would be constant turnover of too many staff. But what I find now in England has got like a bit more like how America used to be. I think the mega shops are there. A lot of big companies here, all massive, all amazing companies, all employing like 40, 50, 60 people. Sort of employing a lot of people. But a lot of people now, you are put in a little box. It's like, you're the molder.
Since COVID and the SAG strike,
it's like you're the mold maker.
It's changed somewhat that,
and like you're the painter, you're the silicon runner, you're the guy that just puts the bolts in. It's like there's kind of like this. It was put down to be pigeonholed, but also an essential part of a process, essential part of a big company. The minute it grows above 10 people, suddenly you need just people just doing silicon, and that's it. But because there's so many shops and so much choice. Like when we were starting out and there was those small shops and like say like everybody who starts in the industry and goes, I want to do makeup, I want to sculpt, I want to paint. They want to do the fun things. Everybody wants to do that. Everybody who leaves college wants to do that. Those jobs weren't there when we started. There wasn't enough. There was like I say 8 or 10 people at those companies. So the sculpting jobs were like, they were really good. They had their feet right under the table. They were fully secure and they were the best guys in the business. You couldn't even catch up to those guys. And it was the same in the paint department, same everywhere. So if you wanted a job in the industry like I did, you had to pick a job that you could maybe have a chance of achieving that job. And in my case, it was doing mechanics. A lot of people didn't want to do mechanics. I started off as a mechanic. I did that for about 6-7 months at Animated Extras. I thought it was amazing at it. I was actually really terrible. I was the worst mechanic in the world. And I would just take mechanics off the shelf and copy bits off of them and try to make my own. I seen real mechanics later and I was like, oh, okay. And you realise your level of where you're at with something like that. But because I was doing mechanics, I was also making my own cores for the mechanics. And I'd go in the mould shop. There's a lovely guy called Jamie Iovino at the time working there. And I'd go, do you mind if I mould my own core? And I'd go in there quite sheepish and be, yeah, okay. Set me up and give me the things I need, working with other people that would help me. And eventually he was like, that guy's quite good at making fiberglass stuff and that. So when I started, the mechy stuff slowed down. He was like, could we have him in the mould shop? And I was like, great. I've got a job longer now here. And then that just went further and I started doing a lot more moulding and I become in one of those departments. And I used to at that time try to chat, going, could I get off and do some painting? And they'd go, no, we don't have any positions painting. You have to stay in the mould shop. Could I do some sculpting? No, we don't. Those positions are filled. There was such limited spaces. It wasn't that easy. I didn't know it at the time. I used to bitch and whine about it. But it's kind of like, I realise it now. As I've grown up, I see exactly for what the industry was and why I couldn't get into them
You had your 5 sculpted people and they were already earmarked before you rolled in. You were never going to be sculpted.
Yeah, of course. And it's like, but being a young kid, you don't understand. You just think like kind of, well, give me something. Just give me a set of hands to sculpt. Give me anything. And but it's tied up because I'll be the sculptor's next job. And so on. So that's kind of how it was. But now I find in the industry, there's a huge drought of mould makers. I don't know if you're aware of that, but in England there's a huge drought of mould makers, and I always get calls going, "Can you come in?" I had to turn one down the other week. It's kind of like, and they go, "You can't get mould makers anywhere. You can't get them. Nobody wants to do it." And what I've found, a lot more people I've seen start. I've seen some good people start in the mould shop, and within a few months, weeks, they're like, "I don't want to be doing this. I want to go into art finishing. Can I do art finishing?" And if they get told, no, you can't, you're not doing art finishing when you're doing the mould shop, they're gone. They're art finishing at another company 6 months later. So I like, it's a lot easier to transition into different departments now if you jump shop, but you have to jump shop to do that really. Not many shops will like move you. Some of them do, but a lot of them, it's just kind of easier just to walk in fresh to a new place.
That's a risky thing to do though, I think.
It sort of is, but it seems to work really well for a lot of people, and a lot of people who I've seen do that have been incredible in whatever department they've gone into, because there's been room for manoeuvre. That room for manoeuvre didn't used to exist as much. It might have done in the States, I'm not sure how it worked there, but over here it exists a bit better. And I think I like it. I like the fact people can actually go into what trade they want.
I think I'd hate to get a reputation as being a ship jumper.
Yeah, and there's not really ship jumping. They'll always do it to the end of the job. But it's just when that job's over and then they mightn't call back to get into that company. They might think, actually, if I go back there, I'm just going to do the thing I don't want to do. So they'll call up another company and go, "Hi, can I come and show you my stuff?" Chances are they probably already had painting and sculpting in there anyway. So they go to the other shop and show them that stuff, and they go, "Yeah, okay, start in the art finish department," and then they've got their in, they've got their gateway in, they've got it. I think the opportunities and the doors for that are a lot more open than they were. Like I say, I don't think that's a negative thing, but what happens with that is you don't get those people that might be an incredible sculptor with a really good eye, or an incredible painter with a really good eye, that get sort of, in theory, like we were back in the day, stuck in the mould shop.
No one's paying attention to what you know. They don't want to hear it.
Yeah.
They don't want to see
But
it.
the thing is, when you're stuck in the mould shop doing that, you've got that incredible eye still, but you're moulding. So therefore your moulds are really good. So like kind of like, and so therefore there was a lot of really good mould makers. I think there was a patch where you got a huge burst of really good mould makers. But now all I hear is, we can't get mould makers. Can't find it. Nobody wants to do it. We can't get anyone. Everyone doesn't want to do it and can't get them. But also there's like people are very savvy of what wages sort of people get, and personally I think like a lot of like moulding wages sometimes can be like a little bit lower on the scale. So I think people like think, well, why would I mould on that lower scale figure when I can go and just paint?
Because the notion is that sculpture is more of a cleverer skill, so they're worth more.
Yeah, so the wage scale between departments within the industry fluctuates between departments, yeah? So some departments are valued more than others when it comes to that sort of thing. I'm not getting too political with this, but that's just how it is. So I think the mould shop isn't as attractive as it could be. I think if there was a bit more balance there, you'd get more mould makers, because they would be less likely to leave or want to go up what they see is going up the
sculptors
ladder.
work in museums. You see painters work in museums. I've never seen the Museum of Mold Making.
No, there should be one. But that happens a lot. The other thing as well is, you know, if you sculpt something, you get to take a photo of that, and then when you see the creature on the screen, you go, "That's my sculpt."
Yeah.
It's a finished thing.
So
Whereas
it's
no one gives
completely-
a fuck about the mold that sculpt came out of.
So it's completely understandable.
Yeah.
Like I haven't got a fault at any of those people. I might have done 20 years ago, but now I'm like kind of good on them. Good on them. They've got into doing the thing they wanted to do, and they're on a higher wage scale because they got into the thing they wanted to do. But like I say, like when I keep hearing, "We can't get any mould makers, can't get any mould makers, can't get any mould makers," I'm like, well, have a little think about why that might be. It's like kind of try to retain them. Try to make it more attractive.
Yeah.
Well,
try to give them
Stop treating them like shit.
Try to give them a nicer environment to be in. It's
Yeah.
like try to stop calling them sticky boys and sticky shop, and stop calling them mould monkeys. That's a good start. Like when somebody comes into a mould shop and they hear that they're called a mould monkey or the sticky shop, they straight away know it's a derogatory term to call them. So they immediately like, "Oh well, I want to get out of this." Who everyone's like that in any given part of society. Like kind of like if it's deemed a derogatory thing, you want to try to get up and get out of that pit.
It's the same way on set with makeup artists. You know, vanities or makeup. You see, I have a fucking name.
Yeah, same thing. And it's and not all people are like that. Like some of the sculptors, some of the best sculptors I've ever worked with have ultimate highest respect for the person who's moulding their work. But it's not across the board. Some people just see it like it's a bit of a low job and you're beneath them, and so on.
That's like the cultural side of it as well. The other thing I remember, again, we're going back like 20 years, but from a tax point of view, I remember there were certain positions that you had to have in order to be. The tax system here is most people who are self-employed. It's a bit different now because everything's done through payroll, but it used to be you got paid direct by the boss, and they were allocated a certain amount of people who were allowed to be self-employed. And then when they got to a certain point, other crew, they were only allowed like maybe 10 people were self-employed, but they need 15 people. So the next 5 would be what's known as PAYE, but their tax would be taken out at the point you get your pay packet. The tax already been taken out. But if you were freelance,
so you
could claim back your mileage.
Yeah.
I wasn't allowed, and that happened to me in the Mummy, and I was really pissed off.
Yeah.
The people who were allowed to be freelancer were called animatronic model designers. That was the title you were given, and you might not even be doing animatronics, but that was the title given. And I was in the mold room, so I was ended up being called a mold maker, but there was another mold maker in there that was known as an animatronic model designer. So we were on the same bench, and they get their stuff they can claim back on tax, and they had to pay their tax at the end of the year. But on mine, it was taken at source. So again, you end up with a sort of another 2-tier system, which makes you feel othered, because you're like, well, you could decide to call me that, but I'm just being I can't not. So now It's actually going to cost me money now because of that.
like all the way through college and all the way through every single experience in my life, of any form of art, any place I ever worked, I was always treated like as an equal.
Yeah.
Until I become a mould maker in the mould shop, and then it was like kind of like definite, like some people looking right down on you, and so like I say, some people not. There's a real weird mix. I remember Tamsin Hanks once saying, everybody thinks the moulding in the mould shop's the easiest thing to do, and everybody in there's thick, yeah. And she went, but then when they try to mould stuff and they have an experience of it, even if it's for quite a considerable amount of time, they actually realise how complicated it is, how many figures you've got to work out, how much mathematics you've got to do, how much the ratios, percentages, like
it's the skill of it as well.
All the skill, all the materials you've got to. You have to learn about 200 different materials within your first year or two. There's a lot going on in that world. There's a lot in it. Everyone just thinks, oh, it's just slapping some stuff on, isn't it? And it's like, no.
There's some chemistry involved.
Like
there's
I say,
math involved.
Like a good mould maker, right? I've worked right next to a guy, right? Like, and this is a sort of the sort of thing that happens in a mould shop. I'll be sitting there on one bench, there's another guy next to me on the other bench. We're both doing exactly the same thing. We're both cleaning up the model. Say if it was the same model, exactly the same hand. He's got the left hand, I got the right hand. We're both cleared up exactly the same. He might just have to clear walls slightly with a little viscous in the corner. So it's slightly thing, which means one part of the mould will come out with a little knife edge and the other one will come out with a little curve on it. Whereas I'll try to get that like 90 degrees to the sculpt. So that'll be one little thing. They might just miss that little bit and it'll be so subtle you basically have to take your glasses off to see it. Then they might use like round keys that are just round dug in, like you've dug it in with your thumb. And whereas I'll use like keys with hard edge, like again, or like almost like sort of a not a Roman key, but a kind of like a roundy key with a flat base. That's good. You can't move left, right, up or down. It's locked into that place. I'll wax it with minimal wax. Then when I fiberglass it, I keep my gel coat at an equal thickness all over. Whereas a lot of people put a gel coat on, they'll have it pooled on the edges. And like say if it pools, you're going from 0.5 mil of gel coat to like 5 millimeters of gel coat, a centimeter of gel coat. You're going to get, when the exotherm kicks off on that gel coat, it's going to creep away, it's going to crack, it's going to bend, so you get little things like that. And on the surface, you look at both gel coats, they'll both look the same on the left and the right hand. They'll do that. They'll fiberglass it uneven, they'll pool resin in that. They'll like have 4 layers on one bit, 1 layer on another, and so on. And again, I'll do mine equal layer. I'll not make it resin rich. It'll be very like evenly fiberglassed. We'll both tissue it, done. Flip it over, clean the clear wall off. There's some make or break in that as well, whether you're going to let water seep between the model and creep in and then burst your sort of seam where it creeps away and you get a step. And there's also then they'll once it's done, they'll dry it. Sometimes they mightn't dry it properly, so then when they wax it, the next gel coat will stick to it because the wax didn't go on it because there's some wet bits. But if they have not done that, I've seen that happen, but if they've not done that and they wax it, they might use too much wax, like I mentioned earlier. They might forever, and then it blows the seam when you open the mold. And we've both been sitting next to each other, we've both done the same beats at the same time, we've done everything exactly the same pretty much, but those little nuances on each little step. The right hand might be perfect, the left hand will be all blown and all over the place, and they'll go, well, what went wrong in that other hand? And it's really difficult to explain. Like, it could even just be one of those things that was slightly different, like the wax or the gel coat to it.
Yeah, 10 of those.
That's enough. But you add them all up together, you've got a bad mould. And it's those little...
and say you've got 50 sets of gloves to make, and then someone's got to seam those moulds. They've got to spend a morning seaming his, and yours, you could just pluck it in 5 minutes, they're good to go.
It only takes a fraction of a millimeter to lock a mold with an undercut. Which I think undercuts may be the number one consideration.
Sure, but you get this level of pride and professionalism in the work where even if something wouldn't have actually been a problem, you're still going over the board to make it just perfect.
And the point I did not make, obviously, was you have to be really observant to look at those places on the sculpture to see where there might be a danger, a red flag area.
And that's the thing, which I think, like, when you got a good mold maker, or what people deem as a good mold maker in a mold shop, the chances are they're only a good mold maker because they've got a good eye, and they know what a good sculpt looks like and what a good seam should look like, and they know they can also do that stuff to some degree, maybe not as good as the top sculptors, but they know how to do that stuff themselves, and therefore everything's taken pride with. Whereas a lot of people can treat a mold maker like they're just fake, and they're like, and they just slap it on, and it's like, and they think that's what it's like that. If everybody was like that, all of the things would be like the other guy. They would all be like that right hand. They would all be put on too thick, seams blowing, loads of problems down the line. And it's kind of like, so how do you attract? You can get loads of those guys. I could find a load of those mold makers tomorrow. You could train them up really quick to do that, and not care really about what they're doing, and not really could be good. You need the ones that have got a good eye for sculpting and painting, and the ones that have done all of the areas where they're the ones that are the really good mold makers, the ones that they understand all the other areas and what the other guys are doing, like you say. It's and those people, I don't see as many of them these days.
No, well, the tragedy of it is, it's as well, I think there's some lack of incentive, because the mold is a kind of invisible process, because like a sculptor will sculpt something, and then when you see the finished creature, you can see what they have sculpted. But your molds are now in mold storage in a lockup somewhere on their way to some Disney compound. Do you know what I mean? So it's like the physical mold is necessary as that step, but it's not appreciated, and it's very frustrating. I have heard people say when they've seen like creatures and makeups and stuff, and they go, but doesn't that just come out of a mold? That nose looks really cool, but it just comes out of a mold. It's like, where the fuck do you think the mold came from? Do you know what I mean? It's like, it's not, you don't just go to a fucking shop and buy it on the shelf. It doesn't exist. And a mold has to be made well, because a mold has to function. This is one of the things we want to talk about in the show, is like, people dabble with sculpt, they'll sketch with paper, they'll do non-committed things artistically, or artistic things in a non-committal way. They'll play with it. People don't tend to play with molds, because you either make a mold or you don't, but you can doodle. So people aren't as familiar with molding and the errors of molding, because they'll do something if they think they can do it, but if they don't think they can do it, they'll just not do it at all, and they avoid it. So you end up with people who don't make molds of things unless it's a situation where they're being led through, like you were quite bold about the things you did, and you would try these things out. That is unusual, Brian. Most people don't do that, and thank God you are like that.
The other thing as well is, like, a lot of people, I've heard this said by people who are non-mold makers, they'll go, nobody cares about the mold until it goes wrong, and then once it's gone wrong and something's effed up, basically, they have to resculpt it or get a press out of it and start again. Then they're like, basically, that's a scenario where you get called up going, could you come in? We just had something go wrong. Could you come in and fix it all? And I personally have not done many of those jobs, but I know people who have, and they've done wonderful things. They've gone in and somehow fixed a scenario that's really bad. But the weird thing is, I've seen that happen before. Then they've got rid of the good guy, carried on with the bad guy again. And you kind of go, oh my God, and then they've forgotten about it, and you go, no, remember, like, they can go really badly wrong, and you're going to suffer. You might lose 4 days of a build, having to resculpt something, get another press out, redo it all, and get a new mold made again. It's like, that's pretty big. It's a pretty big deal. And but if you really consistently,
and that looming deadline is not going to change.
And if you're really consistently good at anything, it goes unnoticed. So if you're like by most people, I'm not saying that like say what I've done's gone unnoticed. It's gone incredibly well noticed. People in America contact me. People all over go, oh, I can't believe how that technique you did and whatever. I know it goes noticed, but it's kind of like, which company you might be at a given point, you might have like a 4-year run at making every single mold golden and everything's perfect, and then they don't actually realize like how valuable you are. You're not valued in that way to buy. Everyone just thinks it's easy because they never see a mistake happen. And I remember a story one person told me once where he stuck a makeup on set, and there was 2 guys on set. One guy's makeup was going like quite wrong, and his makeup was going perfectly fine. And he said, like, and the other people on the set that weren't makeup related were like, oh my God, isn't that guy so good? He's always in there fixing it and making it good and touching up and pushing it down and making it good. He's doing it all day. He's working so hard. And what are you doing? You're lazy. You're just sitting there doing nothing all day and whatever. And like, oh, are you doing? You take a leaf out of his book and that. And he's going, well, my makeup's got nothing wrong with it. He's like, I've done my job properly and it's stuck on and it's not falling off and everything like that. And you're saying the guy that's doing it badly is doing amazing because it looks like he's proactive and it looks like he's fixing it and saving the day. It's like, that guy's saving the day. You're not, you're sitting in a chair. And it's like this...
I've got nothing to say. I did it properly.
And I was working, I was working on a job once it was for League of Extraordinary Gentlemen with Steve Johnson's crew. His crew was incredible. Absolutely incredible. There's not one bad guy in that team. Not one guy that dropped anything. They were all like kind of like super duper like workers and so loyal and so good. I couldn't work out a single error I'd ever seen one of those guys do. And then one day I'd come back to the hotel after working and one of the camera guys pulled me aside and went, what do you guys do all day? And he had a massive go at me. You just sit around all day in chairs and all this sort of stuff. And I did the same thing. I said, well, it's because we've done our job properly. And I was defending Steve's crew. It was I was just there to help. I was just an extra fixture to the team. But I was kind of like, we've all done our job properly, so there's nothing to do. I went like kind of like, so we're on standby for if something goes wrong. And if nothing goes wrong, you shouldn't be attacking us for that. It's like kind of where we've done our job so well, nothing's going wrong. Why are you complaining? And he just kept complaining at me. He was one of the camera tech guys. And the camera tech guys...
It's not his fucking job to
but the camera tech guys were working incredibly hard on that job. And I think they were getting a bit fucked off that they were looking over, seeing us sitting down in chairs all day while they were working their arse off. And Steve Norrington, the director...
That's what camera guys do.
Yeah, but Steve Norrington, the director, used to be a creature guy. So he treated the creature people like gold. But with the camera crew, he was a bit more harder on them. He was a bit like, come on, guys, get that. And the lighting guys, he was the opposite of what I see with normal directors.
Gotcha.
He was like, costume, yay! And they loved all costume and creature effects. He was all over us.
Right.
And he treated us like gold. He was like amazing. I loved working for Steve Norrington. A lot of people, if you ask that with the camera crews, they'll probably go, I never work with the guy. I don't like it. It was horrible. And they might say that, they might not. But it's kind of like, I loved working for Steve Norrington on that job. It was one of the best jobs I ever had. And working with Steve's crew on that job, the same deal. Yeah. But we were sitting down a lot playing Uno because the job was done so perfectly and the camera guys did not like that.
Yeah. And you were in attendance, and if anything went wrong, you would have jumped on it. Like there was nothing to go wrong.
Yeah. I ended up having to say to the camera guy, look, it's 4 a.m. We've just come back from a long day's shoot. If you've got a problem, could you please take it up with production? I went, don't come and attack me at the end of my hard working day. I'm like, and then I went on my merry way. And the strange thing about that, creature guys being creature guys and Steve Johnson's guys being Steve Johnson guys, they're party animals. So one day, a guy turned up at the hotel I met in the lobby, and I didn't know who this guy was. And he went, I've just landed in the country, I'm working on this thing. And I was, oh yeah, we're working on that thing too. And I just got chatting to the guy and so on, and then he was, oh, I'm only here for like a week. Is there any good places to go? And so on. And I said, I'll tell you what, come out with us tonight. And it was Halloween. And I went, come out with us tonight. And Margaret Prentice did a load of people's makeups. I think I did a few makeups. And we all went out wearing makeup. We might have did his makeup, I can't remember. But we all went out with this guy. It turned out he was the head IMAX guy or whatever from Canada they'd sent out to teach the camera guys on League of Extraordinary Gentlemen how to set up and how to use the IMAX cameras. Because Steve Norrington was shooting IMAX for a lot of frames that you could then isolate smaller areas and move the shot within the IMAX frame. Yeah, right. So they got the IMAX guy over to teach the camera crew how to use the IMAX equipment, but he was so high up at IMAX, I think they could only afford him for a week, and that was it. So you come over with the gear, taught them how to use the cameras, and I went home. But I didn't know this. Like, I'm just out with this guy partying. He's coming out with us. We're having a nice time. We're going for meals. Went out to all these nightclubs. And he was like, here's my card. And it was like, oh, IMAX. He went, come and stay at Canada whenever you want. Like, just stay at my house and like whatever. Just come over and whatever. I never did because I never went to Canada or whatever. But I was like, wow, this guy is so generous and so nice. And I think he was probably feeling the same. Like, these guys would just welcome me into their crazy world for a night out. And I think he might come out another night, I'm not sure. But when we went on set suddenly, this was only a few days after that camera guy had to go about sitting down doing nothing, he come up going, how do you know Dave, the IMAX guy or whatever? And I'm like, I don't. And he was like, but he said he was out with you guys all night partying and he had the best time in the world. And he was like, he's a genius. He's like the best guy in the world. He's like so good.
So they were like, different.
They were worshipping this IMAX guy because he must have been some huge big player to them in their world. And they were like, oh my God. And like, whatever that guy has said about us, the camera crew changed their opinion as of that next day, and the camera crew just never said anything. And they used to always be frowning at us a bit before that went away and it was gone. And I was like, it's kind of interesting.
That's nice though.
Yeah. Being nice to somebody paid off massively, and it saved a lot of maybe possible future friction between departments. People suddenly played nice again.
It was such a nice, cozy, comfy space that he's built. It was warm because it was cold outside. It was nice and toasty in there, and he had built it like a recording studio. I mean, it was very dead. We could have done podcast episodes or even recorded music in there. It was that kind of atmosphere.
Yeah, it was very cool.
Yeah,
and we did it it was usually when we do these things we have mics, but we just set up a recorder in the room and just chatted, and it sounded
and
fun.
it was perfect.
So yeah, it was fun. It was just, but it's just like I wanted something that wasn't obtrusive because it's just three guys talking about molds, and it doesn't need anything fancy, So I mean, I need to apologize for how much stuff we recorded that I haven't managed to put together yet, because we've got some outstanding episodes in the can. It's just been,
well, life gets in the way, doesn't it?
but I just find it a bit frustrating when I can't get round to editing and putting them out, because I really love doing the podcast, but it's just one of those things that, like, if there's work or there's family issues or someone's sick, or we've had all of that, then like it just gets in the way of business. So it interferes with things. So I apologize for the time between this and the last episode, but it's not a lack of willing, and it's not a lack of energy on this part. I can assure you the things
we love doing it.
Love doing it. It's amazing. And I'm sorry it's been so long before we've been able to do these bumpers and record this conversation. I haven't spoken to you since Christmas Day. I think we chatted on Christmas Day.
Yeah, a few text messages, but I think this is the first time I've seen your face since Christmas Day.
So yeah, it's been mad. It's been busy. But the reason I've been so busy is because I've been doing stuff, and that keeps my tools sharp. So I come to you fresh from the field. But it just means that I just go to ground for a while or go dark, and I don't post anything on Instagram for ages because I'm working on productions where I can't show anyone what I'm doing, or it's all hush stuff. So I'm not trying to chase the likes. So I just I do what we do, and then when something good comes out, hopefully people listen and like it. But what I'm not doing is getting all what's the word? When people they'll record something every day or every week, regardless of how good it is, or if they've got something to say, they'll just pump out content because they're on a treadmill and they've got to keep going. I don't want to be that, which means I end up refraining long enough that the algorithm forgets who I am, and that's fine. But
what do you mean I have to enter a password again?
So I tell you what, let me just say, hopefully you enjoyed that chat with Brian.
Please don't give up on us.
We're
trying. We haven't given up on us. Stuart questions my existence sometimes, but as do I. But please keep listening. We've got some good stuff coming up. I promise.
Get out there. That's all.
Yeah. Stuart just needs to get off his ass and finish it.
Yes. I'm a tardy bastard. But right. I'm just opening up ZBrush. I mean, so for all my money, that was fun chatting to Brian. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, he's a great guy, and he knows his stuff.
He does. And what I think is important for me as well, just as a kind of, it's quite an emotional thing in a way, that the whole business of seeing molds being made, and then we get better at mold makers over the years, and then the whole digital thing, because there was a time, I don't know, 20 years ago where CG was really kicking off and everyone was saying, oh, that there'll be no more work with the because of CG. But from a mold making point of view, it's weird how actually the workshops and people within the workshops are using digital tools and talking a similar language. We didn't think that was going to happen 20 odd years ago, you know, and it's lovely to see good mold makers making great molds digitally and able to be of value to the visual effects department because they can handle the same tools. We can send them a 3D scan and we can clean it up and they can use that and they might send an asset to us and we can incorporate it and use it. And it makes it a much more two-way thing.
No, and I think that's probably the biggest takeaway from the digital revolution is that it's making us more productive.
Yeah.
Like on SAS Rogue Heroes, that you were able to email me a digital file that I could clean up because your hands were tied with other stuff, and I could accommodate you and then fix it and email it back to you, and nothing physical had to get shipped anywhere.
Yeah.
It was all perfectly safe. That's like, holy crap, that wasn't possible just a few years ago.
But I do think it's important that everyone who does things practically can use these tools, because if you understand ZBrush, you can use, or Nomad or whatever, you can take part in that conversation and there will be things that you can do in whatever it is you're interested in digitally that I would never dream of doing. It's just like, it's like anything. It's like a keyboard, you type in stuff. You might type a novel, you might type a shopping list, you might type, a moving post or whatever. The nature of what you write is irrelevant, really. The tool is the same, but if you don't know how to type, you can't use it at all. But once everyone can type and everyone has access to those tools, everyone can write. And it's the difference between writing out 1,000 resumes by hand or writing out once and getting it absolutely perfect and changing the font and updating it without having to rewrite the whole document. It's like it's that plastic.
ZBrush is not that daunting.
Well, I don't know.
Mean, on the face of it, it looks pretty terrifying, but it really isn't.
Well, it's an initial shock that everybody that opens it goes through. And then when you realize you only need 10% of it and that you end up using the same tools all the time, because again, I've used that analogy before. It's like going to a shopping in a supermarket.
Yeah.
Like there are 10 million items in that supermarket. You do not need to know every single product in that store in order to go shopping. You go into that store and you buy the 40 items you always buy, and then you leave. And then somebody else will buy their 40 items. And the fact is that shop has to have things for everybody, and they're all buying different things for different reasons. You might be making burritos tonight. Somebody else is going to make a roast dinner. They don't need the same things, but they go to the same place. And that's all you need to know, really. You come to the tool with desired outcome. I want to make a set of horns on a helmet. That's what I need. And so you're pulling what you need to know to do that. Somebody else might be rigging a thing for animation. So they've got a completely different set of requirements. And there's a whole bunch of stuff on ZBrush I'm never going to touch because I'm not interested in that. And I know that now. But at the time, it felt like I've got to know everything. And you don't. You just need to know like 5 things. And once you've done that, you'll be like, oh, cool, I want to do this a bit more. And then you'll learn a 6th thing and a 7th thing. And once you've known 8 or 9 things, you realize that you can learn 1,000 things without really trying, because you're just building on what you already do. But I think the thing is to make something with it.
Yeah, no, that just makes you more valuable to somebody else if you have now got additional tools in your tool belt.
Yeah, you do. But I think it's really important to have a thing that you want to make and just get on with making it. If you just try and learn it for the sake of learning it, I don't think you'll do it. I think you've just got to, and that's what Brian did. I think his Instagram account is what's the family name in Gremlins? Is it Peltzler?
I don't remember.
Petzler. I think it's the Petzler Pet, and that's Brian's Gremlins account. And that's what he did. He built a gizmo from Gremlins. He sculpted it, and then printed the parts, and then he furred it, and then he made different gizmos. Then he made Gremlins, and then he printed molds, and it's because he wanted to have a gremlin. He was driven by the desire to want to make gremlins.
And he's got boxes full of gremlin parts.
Yeah, and and it's and they are outstanding. But that's kind of the point. It's like you've got to have a thing you want to see exist first, which presumably if you're somebody that makes something with clay and with your hands, that's what you do. And it's just wanting to see that using, a different tool. That's all. But you must have that desire to want something to come into reality first. I think if you just want to learn ZBrush because you think you should, you're not gonna keep that information. It's like anything. If you've got a thing you want, then you can pull in the resources required to make that happen. But just learning in the abstract is not the way. Anyway, waffle. Thanks very much for listening. Email us stuartandtodd@gmail.com.
Yeah, you can even record a voice message on the website and tell us that we're not pulling our weight.
Thanks very much for listening, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Ciao. We could get into lots of trouble together.